Like every other longtime Pikmin fan, I was waiting with bated breath for the fourth Pikmin game to finally release. After years of speculation on what the game was going to be about, countless theory videos on the plot, gameplay mechanics, and what new types of Pikmin there would be,
I'm calling it right now, there'll be ghost Pikmin that you can only use at night. That's it. That's my headcanon. I'm going to leave it at that.
the expectations were about as high as they could have been. See, Nintendo has always had a soft spot for Pikmin, even though it's one of their more niche IPs. This can be seen not only with the Pikmin animated shorts that were produced without promoting any game in particular, but also particularly with the investment of the big man himself, Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto. See, Miyamoto in particular has always had a vested interest in Pikmin and its gameplay. In recent years, Miyamoto has most commonly been associated with extending Nintendo's brand outside of the games, evidenced by his involvement in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, as well as taking the helm of the construction of Super Nintendo World, a Nintendo-themed park hosted at Universal Studios Japan. However, when it came to Pikmin 4 and the announcements and information given prior to its release, who else was featured but Miyamoto, donning his iconic blazer and Pikmin-themed shirt, rambling to hundreds of thousands of viewers about something he called Dandori. Although Pikmin 4 was directed by both Yuji Kondo and Tetsushi Tsunoda, and produced by Takashi Tezuka, with Miyamoto only being credited as a general producer, I think that his influence and love for the franchise permeates through in a really wholesome way. It definitely helped the game when it came to marketing, as well as the hype and excitement around its release. But I'm not here to talk about the marketing or development for Pikmin 4. In fact, I'll be touching relatively little on it, given the overall secrecy of the project, and also the huge amount of time to cover. Now that Pikmin 4 has finally released, and I've played through it enough times all the way through, I'm finally ready to share my feelings on it, and analyze where it delivers, and where it falls short. Hi there, my name's Hef. I've booted up the first 3 Pikmin games hundreds of times in the past. I have played more ROM hacks of the Pikmin franchise than any other person I've met, having played randomizers, remixes, Kaizo versions, and so on. I've released tier lists documenting how good each Pikmin type is in any given game, how dangerous each enemy is in every given game, as well as made an entire feature-length, in-depth analysis of the first 3 Pikmin games, meticulously comparing them to each other. Without exaggeration, I've spent thousands of hours herding these little plant creatures, plucking them from the ground, and mourning their deaths. Pikmin has allowed me to get to where I'm at today, and I'm incredibly thankful to the series and the impact it's had on me both as a gamer and as a human. That all being said, there is a lot to cover when it comes to Pikmin 4. So to help me with gathering footage, documenting, and analyzing the world of Pikmin 4, I've hired a team of expert explorers to assist me. The first one of these distinguished gentlemen to touch down on the planet was Captain Jim, who got the chance to discover this new version of the Pikmin world on release, and did so accompanied by thousands of other Pikmin fans just like him who were experiencing the game for the first time. Jim can be trusted to give us an honest reaction to many of the new things included within the game, albeit through some rose-colored glasses.
Hey guys, I'm in love with Pikmin 4, by the way. I'm in love with this game. I feel, how do I put this? I feel like I have a crush. I feel like this game is who I'd be like taking glances at in the middle of like a math lesson.
The second captain to make their mark on the planet was Captain Thoreau, who spent far more time analyzing the game mechanically and aesthetically. Captain Thoreau's job was to take detailed notes and to think deeper about what PNF 404 has to offer us. This included observing both the Pikmin and enemies' behaviors, breaking down the explorable areas, and providing us with the bulk of the analysis.
Anybody else think the internet's becoming slowly more and more unusable?
The third and final captain who will be contributing to the analysis is Captain Broll. Captain Broll will fill in the gaps left by both Jim and Thoreau, and we can trust Broll to provide us with some stellar footage of the game, as well as to comb over some of the more fine niche details. He also has his drone license, which is pretty cool, I guess. We'll be referencing the work of a number of explorers here, but the playthroughs done by these 3 will make up the majority of the footage that we'll see here today. Alright, now that all those formalities are out of the way, let's finally dive right in. The The prologue of Pikmin 4 follows Captain Olimar and his recount of how he became stranded on the Pikmin planet, followed by having to command Olimar through a guided tutorial section. Pikmin 4 does something that we've yet to see in the franchise, and it begins the game by retconning the events of Pikmin 1. See, this is an alternative take on the events of the first game. Olimar crash lands on PNF 404, discovers the Pikmin, all the lovely stuff we've come to be familiar with, except this time he meets a space dog named Moss, who assists him in collecting his missing ship parts. After Olimar makes it to the hero's hideaway and collects the interstellar radio, he puts out a signal to the rescue corps before ultimately disappearing and failing to escape the Pikmin planet. And that's where you come in, a fresh new rescue corps recruit from the planet Carrot, ready to take on your first mission of saving the missing Captain Olimar and anyone else you might find stranded on the Pikmin planet. Even though we're chatting about the beginning of the story right now, it's as good a time as any to note that this is the first time in the franchise that we've had a create your own captain scenario for the main character you'll be playing as, and as such, they serve as sort of a silent protagonist cut from the cloth of Red from Pokemon. It's pretty cool to be able to create your own captain, even with the relatively limited options available to you, but it does detract in the aspect that your character really doesn't have their own voice or any type of development throughout the game, unlike the captains of the previous 3 games. Upon landing on the planet, the player encounters Oatchi, a rescue pup in training, almost immediately, forming a bond that will allow them to slowly but surely overcome the natural forces of PNF 404. Oatchi helps you progress forward, and the player finds the first of the 6 Rescue Corps members, the communications operator, Colin. With Colin in tow, he sets you on track to get unstuck from your current situation, letting you know that the SS Shepherd landed relatively close, and that together you should find the ship first and foremost. After traveling through the Burrow of Beginnings and rescuing the in-over-her-head Captain Shepard, 99th leader of the Rescue Corps, the trio finds the ship and sets up the rescue command post, a mini hub area that serves as your base of operations during your time on the Pikmin planet. In order to search for the remaining Rescue Corps members, as well as fulfill your original mission of rescuing Captain Olimar, the SS Shepherd needs to be powered by a resource called Sparklium, which can be found in varying amounts in objects and treasures. Gathering Sparklium serves as your primary objective day to day, as the more Sparklium you gather, the more area you can explore, and subsequently the more Corps members and other castaways you'll be able to rescue from the clutches of the planet. Eventually, during your exploration, you'll run into characters called Leaflings, castaways that were previously stranded on the planet that have been forcibly mutated into a half Pikmin, half astronaut hybrid by a mysterious red leafy figure.
He's red! Look at the nose and the eyes! That's Olimar! It's gotta be Olimar!
Right from the reveal of this character, longtime Pikmin fans were excited. Ever since the days of Pikmin 1, my personal favorite Pikmin game, there's always been an air of intrigue surrounding the final cutscene of the game should you fail to collect every required ship part to allow Olimar to escape the planet. After attempting to take off and crashing down on the planet once more, the Pikmin will nonchalantly carry Olimar's presumably dead or unconscious body back to the Onion the same way they would do in an enemy corpse or a pellet posy. After being absorbed into the Onion, an Olimar-like sprout will be planted in the ground as the final note on a failed playthrough. Something about this has always stuck with me, as I'm sure it has with the majority of the fanbase. Thoughts rush through your head like, how could the Pikmin do this to Olimar? Is he just food to them now? Why did an Olimar-shaped sprout pop out of the Onion instead of a collection of Pikmin sprouts? Why was he seemingly not converted directly into nutrients? Does he retain his sentience? Can the Pikmin selectively initiate this process? If so, has this process been initiated before on another creature? Is this an act of respect or dominance? There's so much to consider when it comes to just a simple 40-second cutscene, and it doesn't help that Pikmin 2 and Pikmin 3 barely touch on this strange little cutscene from Pikmin 1. That's why, as soon as this red leafling popped on screen, it was clear to longtime fans that this was an interpretation over 2 decades later of bad ending Olimar. If they were going to retcon the events of the first game, this would be the exact spot in the Pikmin timeline to do it. The concept of the leaflings to me fits so naturally in the wacky and sort of oddly dark nature of the Pikmin franchise. By being leafified, these astronauts are stripped of their free will, and the experience is described to the player as though they're lost in a bad dream. forced to become part of the ecosystem of PNF 404 and obsess over the concept of Dandori. So all things considered, Olimar's been put through the ringer in Pikmin 4, and it's up to the player to save not only him, but all of the leaflings from the grip of the planet, and by extension, the Pikmin. The Pikmin are your greatest allies, and also the direct cause of the leafling epidemic. Not to say the leafification process is an act of malice on the Pikmin's part. More likely, it's actually a way the Pikmin feel like they're saving the castaways, as being leafified comes with the added effect of allowing the astronaut to breathe the oxygen of PNF 404 and ultimately gives them a chance to survive. This is a really smart and lore-driven way of introducing a sort of rival captain faction to combat the Rescue Corps during their time exploring the planet. When I first realized that Bad Ending Olimar was not the only leafling in the game, I got really excited, as the designs of the leaflings to me are way more marketable than the rather off-putting designs of the captains previously. Sure, I've grown to love and appreciate them, but to your average person, the cute, hairy Pikmin-like cavemen are definitely more appealing than a strange little elf person with exaggerated features. I mean, just boot up Smash Ultimate with a non-gamer buddy and ask them to pick out the weirdest character. Olimar has a pretty good chance to be the one they select. Still my goat, though. Speaking of these strange little people with exaggerated features, after being rescued and eventually cured from their leafling state, after you save the doctor of the Rescue Corps Yanni and harness the power of the glow Pikmin and their glow sap, these castaways offer a bunch of fascinating lore and details that really flesh out the Pikmin universe as a whole. We'll chat more about Yanni and the glow Pikmin a little bit later in the character and Pikmin sections respectively, but for now let's focus on the smaller, less appreciated details of the story before we get to saving leafling Olimar. Once a castaway is rescued, they become a permanent fixture of the rescue command post and can be interacted with in between days to chat about their past and how and why they came to be stuck on the Pikmin planet. I've already made a video ranking all these castaways, and even though they're not the most impressive thing about the game, their inclusion adds some much needed texture to the one-noteness of the Rescue Corps. Talking with these castaways will not be something you need to do much of in order to progress the story, but it does fill you in on their circumstances and provides details on their home planets, as well as paints a picture of the greater Pikmin galaxy as a whole, which I find kinda nice. There's scientists, media personalities, business moguls, a teacher, and the club she chaperones, and many other kinds of people you'll rescue over the course of the story. Some of these castaways have quests for the player to complete, asking you to do things like grow Pikmin, defeat enemies, collect treasure, and more. Stuff you're going to be doing anyway. Rescuing these castaways while obtaining Sparklium is your primary goal on the planet outside of saving Olimar, and as such, they sort of serve as benchmarks for your progression. The rescue command post expands as you save more and more of these castaways, and eventually after rescuing Bernard, something odd occurs with Oatchi. His tail, which was previously a little tough to fur, has now been transformed into a leaf, mimicking the Pikmin's physiology, but no other noticeable change occurs. Once the players gathered enough Sparklium, the Corps heads to the hero's hideaway, finding Olimar at his makeshift base of operations in the vault, and recovers him after defeating him in a Dandori battle. Moss, Olimar's dog, who also has a leaf for a tail, evades capture and runs off. This is where the main story of Pikmin 4 wraps itself up. After the credits roll, the Rescue Corps try to leave the planet, but something seems to be wrong with Oatchi. Because Oatchi's been infected by this Pikmin virus, he's no longer able to leave the planet without falling ill. So the Corps turns right around and tries to brainstorm a way to cure Oatchi of this condition in order for them to leave successfully. Like Pikmin 2 before it, there's a post-game that heavily features fan-favorite troublemaker Louie, as he continues leafling Olimar's work of kidnapping and leafifying the castaways. Notably, he entangles himself in the affairs of a few very familiar-looking characters. These are the Copiates, hailing from the same home planet as the protagonists of Pikmin 3. And yeah, let's just get this out of the way now. The Pikmin 3 captains were done absolutely dirty in Pikmin 4, as these Copiates blatantly parallel the crew in numerous ways, but they're not the same characters. Don Bergman is the first of these Copiates to be rescued, and tells us of the rest of his crew, Engineer Yorkie and Veterinarian Nell. Finding Nell becomes a main goal of the Rescue Corps, as they're hoping to use her experience as a vet to find the cure for Oatchi. The mission continues as normal, rescuing castaways, expanding your search area, collecting more treasure and Sparklium to fuel the ship, all the while looking for these missing Copiates who Louie has had a very personal hand in making hard for the player to track down. After eventually defeating Louie in a couple of Dandori battles and rescuing both Yorkie and Nell, the player descends through the final cave, Cavern for a King, and faces down Louie and the ancient Sirehound, who upon defeat drops its collar with the puppy DNA necessary to finally assist in curing Oatchi of his leafification and allowing the Rescue Corps and all the castaways to finally leave the planet with their mission a complete success. There's not really too much to unpack when it comes to the nuances of Pikmin 4's story, especially prior to rescuing Olimar, as it really just kind of boils down to save castaways, collect treasure. I think the Pikminification of Oatchi opens up some more fascinating questions about PNF 404 and the intrinsic nature of the Pikmin. Can anyone be infected? Why does Oatchi fall ill once leaving the planet? Are the planet itself and the Pikmin linked in some type of parasitic way? This only becomes more complicated if you consider Hey Pikmin to be part of the canon, as the planet Olimar crash lands on in that game is totally separate from PNF 404, but is home to plenty of species native to PNF 404, including the Pikmin. Then we have to consider that Olimar's riding around in the SS Dolphin 2 in Hey Pikmin, and since Pikmin 4 is a retelling of the events prior to Pikmin 1, where he has the SS Dolphin 1, this implies that all of these events in Hey Pikmin take place after Pikmin 4, and should not be considered in the lore that Pikmin 4 is trying to establish. This is where the Pikmin series shines in my opinion, as while the IP has historically been very clearly gameplay focused, with the story being more of a formality, the mystery of what the Pikmin are and their role in the general ecosystem of the planet has always been fascinating, and Pikmin 4 delivers on that mystery even further with the idea of this infection. Of course, the Pikmin have always been framed as cute and silly creatures, but there's gotta be some reason all the wildlife on the planet seems to have a vendetta against them, right? Regardless, Pikmin 4 offers a more complex and detailed story than any of the 3 previous main entries in the franchise, but that doesn't mean it's complicated for the player to understand, as after all, at the end of the day, the game's still made for kids. I'm glad they decided to implement the story beats they did, with the concept of the leaflings and the Pikmin infection being my personal highlights of the campaign, but all in all, it's really nothing too special. People are in danger, and your job as a Rescue Corps member is to save them. But who exactly are the Rescue Corps, and do they impact the story in meaningful ways? As I mentioned, for the first time in a Pikmin game, you're able to create your own captain, who serves as the mostly silent protagonist over the course of the campaign. But what are your allies in the Rescue Corps? Well, if you're a silent protagonist, that must mean that they're not so silent. The primary critique of Pikmin 4's characters simply boils down to them talking too much and constantly butting in their heads to give you helpful tips and remarks on various things you'll be encountering on your journey. Previously, dialogue and exposition was primarily given at the tail end of a Pikmin day, whether through Olimar's journal entries recounting his day in Pikmin, the emails received in Pikmin 2, or the voyage log / conversations in the SS Drake in Pikmin 3. Pikmin 4 is definitely a bit bloated with dialogue. As with more than double the cast of characters of any of the previous 3 games, everybody here has something to say. Speaking of something to say, let's start by talking about the first Rescue Corps member you save, Colin. Colin has a mostly agreeable personality, and takes his job a little more seriously than many other members of the Rescue Corps. Installed some new apps. Damn it, Colin, there's so much stuff to get through. But Colin is heralded as the absolute worst offender of this tutorial-style dialogue that persists through the entire game. Compared to the other members of the Rescue Corps, Colin has easily the most bland and missable dialogue. You kind of become accustomed to literally averting your eyes from these text blurbs on screen to try and focus on what's actually going on in front of you. Basically, everything Colin has to say can be boiled down to, yes, I'm playing the game too. I can see that for myself. Colin is the communications operator of the Rescue Corps, and is the one you'll be talking to at the beginning of every day to leave the base camp and participate in a day of exploration. Theorists prior to Pikmin 4's release speculated that Colin may have been a robot, and upon the release of the full game, he might as well be. Probably would have made him significantly cooler too. The second Rescue Corps member you meet is Captain Irma Shepard, the 99th generation leader of the Rescue Corps, and Shepard has a little bit more to latch onto than Colin does as far as her personality goes. Do you stick the landing? No, you plop. Fantastic. Personality, we like that. Shepard is well-intentioned, but isn't so sure of herself in her role as leader of the Rescue Corps. She's got big shoes to fill, but her core-defining trait is being scared of the Pikmin and wildlife alike on the planet. This is really only used as a gag for her character, but it helps to humble her and prop up you, the new recruit, in the context of the story. Shepard has the second most tutorial-style dialogue, and serves as the main expositor of the Corps, always yapping during the morning meetings and rehashing to the player the primary objective of the Corps at any given time. Through the Captain's Log, we're able to take a more extended look into Shepard's insecurities as well as her family history, and she has a surprising amount of substance for a character who essentially accomplishes nothing herself on the Pikmin planet. That being said, Shepard's one of the only Rescue Corps members that I'd probably like to see return to the franchise in some capacity in the future. Ross is the Rescue Corps' lab tech, a classic, good-natured scientist who, once rescued, is able to utilize the raw material the player collects in order to provide the player with upgrades and helpful tools to use on the journey. He functions like the shopkeeper of the game, but outside of some stray dialogue, there's really not too much to unpack with him. Dingo's found next, and he's a little less agreeable than the other members of the Rescue Corps. Dingo prefers to work alone and does things at his own discretion. He's the one who steps in to help the player if they can't complete a Dandori battle or night expedition, an easy way to get past tough challenges for newer players, and a very helpful mechanic if you're into speedrunning like me. Dingo shares a subplot with Bernard, another Rescue Corps member, where he abandons Bernard in a cave, which, while funny, doesn't exactly paint him in a good light from the jump. Still though, despite his flaws, I rather like Dingo, as he gives the Rescue Corps some much needed texture, and at the end of the day, he really does care for his comrades. Yanni's the doctor of the Rescue Corps, and somewhat of a mad scientist, and while necessary for the subplot of curing leaflings, I gotta be honest guys, I'm not a big fan of him.
Gather the glow Pikmin I need. I'm gonna relax. Focus on protecting after that. Shut up. Get him.
Yanni's the Colin of night missions, and refuses to leave you alone anytime you're out on the planet's surface during off-peak hours. He's always making some comment about glow Pikmin, and to me, feels fairly tacked on within the dynamics of the Corps itself. Finally, there's Bernard, a cool high-flying guy who's a pilot of the SS Shepard, and without him, there would be no leaving PNF 404. Bernard's always really positive and carries a certain, what the kids call aura about him in comparison to the rest of his comrades. I like him. He's got the shades. The aviators go crazy. He's introduced relatively late, but I like Bernard since he rarely talks your ear off, unlike some of the other Corps previously mentioned. Those are the 6 Rescue Corps members that you'll work with over the course of your adventure, not including Oatchi, who, character-wise, he's a dog, guys. All he does is bark and headbutt things. Including the Kopayats I mentioned earlier, Olimar, Louie, and Moss to an extent, this rounds out the largest cast of characters the Pikmin franchise has ever dared to juggle. And how well did they do? Certainly not bad. Olimar's characterization's on point, and the Kopayats offer some interesting world building for the Pikmin 3 captains, but as for the totally new characters, yeah, they're not the strongest. Between the morning meetings, being forced to interact with them every time you'd like to play the game, the occasional interruptions during the game, their tendency to remind you exactly what you should be doing at any given moment, and every single interaction at night only further cement them as more of a plot formality rather than a bunch of interesting characters. There's nothing all that wrong with them, and they occasionally have a funny line or two, but honestly, you'll be mashing through their dialogue more often than not. Just quick little aside as I'm editing this here, I've been showing bits and pieces of the Pikmin comic strip that's drawn by Kino Takahashi, featured on the official Nintendo website, and it's actually really wonderful, and it helps to flesh out each of the Rescue Corps members a little bit more thoroughly. I was just looking for artwork of these characters, since there's really not a lot on them in-game, and I found a treasure trove of fun content that's featuring them. I still think their presentation in-game is rather shallow, but if you're a Pikmin fan and you find a certain distaste with the Rescue Corps in Pikmin 4 like I did, you'll definitely come around to them if you take about like half an hour to read the comic. Not to say that's an excuse for their hand-holding nature in the actual game, but I can see more of what they might have been going for. Alright, now that we've covered the overarching story, as well as the new cast of characters we're going to be experiencing it with, we've gotten most of the formalities here out of the way. The story and characters are important, sure, but we're not critiquing a novel here. Pikmin 4 doesn't set out to tell this super complex and deep story with compelling character motivations and fascinating set pieces. It's a video game, and it's meant, first and foremost, to be played. Before we get hung up on all of the intricate, tiny details of Pikmin 4, let's discuss a few of the biggest things that Pikmin 4 has changed when it comes to the core gameplay of the franchise. Firstly, and in my opinion most importantly, Pikmin 4 implements a new progression system when it comes to how many Pikmin you're able to utilize at any given time. From the beginning of the game, you can only utilize 20 Pikmin in the overworld, and in order to increase the number you can manage, you have to collect an onion-like vegetable called a Flarlick and bring it to the onion to permanently increase the number you can use by 10. Previously, you were always able to have 100 Pikmin out at any given time, and this of course has ramifications for how the game is structured and the overall difficulty, but personally, I can see how this decision was rationalized. It perfectly encapsulates Nintendo's propensity to want to ease the player into managing more and more things with a lighter difficulty curve. Not everyone's comfortable with utilizing an entire squad of 100 Pikmin from the jump, so this is their way of making the Pikmin world feel more quaint for new players, and to ease them into the true scale of things. I think that this new Flarlick system is a bit of a mixed bag, as well yes, it sort of successfully serves to limit the player's ability to progress quickly early game with all the other tools at your disposal in regards to combat. The fact that you're only using 30 or so Pikmin isn't that noticeable unless you're collecting a ton of stuff all at once. On average, Pikmin 4's treasures and enemy corpses are the lightest they've ever been, so the lack of Pikmin to utilize is even less noticeable in these cases. I understand the frustration of veterans who want access to their full squad at once, but overall, I feel like the Flarlick system is one of the least radical changes in Pikmin 4, and I was pleasantly surprised with how intuitive and rewarding it felt being able to manage more and more Pikmin over the course of the playthrough. I personally didn't feel too limited by the smaller number of Pikmin I was able to use, and by the time it started to matter, I'd already collected enough Flarlick. Having a limited number of Pikmin was never really a problem, as the game sort of designed early on around having fewer to work with, so in my mind, the system kind of balances out really well. This limit to your Pikmin squad is only in effect in the overworld, as down in the caves, it's a whole different story. You can now find wild Pikmin in almost every cave in the game, and after plucking them or helping them defeat an enemy, they'll join your squad. Upon leaving that cave, these Pikmin are able to stay in your onion, even if you don't have their color onion collected, with the trade-off being that you can't make more of that type. I think this is a really neat way of making certain Pikmin types a little more important and rare, but since you can go back through caves in order to grind these wild Pikmin over and over again, the inability to grow them with the onion doesn't end up mattering all that much. I definitely like the inclusion of these wild Pikmin, but I also feel as though they end up making it so generally you don't have to propagate as many Pikmin the normal way over the course of a run. Previously, the Pikmin games were balanced around having a maximum of 5 different Pikmin types during the campaign, but with the 8 to 9 types available to the player in Pikmin 4's campaign, Nintendo decided to implement a new system to simplify the management of all these options. And, yeah, it sucks.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me!
Players are now only able to have 3 different Pikmin types in their party at a time, and if you want to use a 4th type, you have to put away one of the first 3 types completely. Only being able to use 3 out of the 8 types at a time is a bad choice in my eyes, and I'm sure plenty of the Pikmin community would agree with me. Part of the fun of Pikmin is having the autonomy to craft your squad in whatever way you see fit, but with this limitation, you have less freedom to build a more balanced and diverse squad. Sure, most areas are designed around a trio of Pikmin types. In fact, the game outright recommends Pikmin types for both areas as well as the caves in those areas. However, since the game gives you the option of changing out your Pikmin types immediately upon entering or exiting a cave, it begins to feel more and more like an arbitrary limitation. This is one of the many choices that Pikmin 4 makes that really kind of hampers the experience for me. Are they trying to make it more convenient for players by removing that layer of strategy in the process of discovering which types you need for an area? For example, it almost feels insulting to approach a cave with a squad of red, ice, and yellows, and have the game recommend you blues, rocks, and wings, and immediately give you the option to switch up your party prior to entry. Previously, if you didn't have the right type of Pikmin for an obstacle or dungeon, you had to run all the way back to the onion to exchange them manually. This makes sense, as it takes time to physically get to the cave, and you're punished by losing that time by having to double back. This trade-off doesn't exist in Pikmin 4, as the game does everything it can to ignore your own personal strategy for any given cave or area. Instead of providing a recommendation to the players and allowing them the opportunity to switch types on a dime, imagine if which Pikmin types the player used was up to
the player. It all just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Pikmin 4 has by far the longest campaign of any main series Pikmin game, which we'll talk about more later. But all of these opportunities for learning and strategy are wiped away from the outset by this Pikmin type limitation. I'm sure Nintendo looks at this mechanic as a sort of quality of life change, and there are ways that it can be argued, but it really feels like the experience has been dumbed down a bit for the average player. Sure, you can always ignore the recommended types and use whatever squad you like, but at the end of the day, the recommended types are usually the ones you'd prefer to be using, so a smart player will end up with a squad similar to what the game suggests anyways. It's frustrating to just be recommended types for an area or cave, and not being given the opportunity to think freely or experiment in this regard, especially on a first playthrough. Limiting the player's decision making in this way is one of the ways that Pikmin 4 seems sort of sanitized for a younger, less attentive audience. I'm someone who believes that kids are much smarter than we give them credit for, and providing these opportunities for failure are important in developing this type of problem-solving skill. Taking away these decisions and opportunities from the player, or strongly suggesting that these decisions should never have to be made in the first place, hurts Pikmin 4 overall, and causes each playthrough to feel the same, player to player. I know that this 3-type limitation is something the community is mostly against, but I feel like accurately explaining why this limitation is actively insulting to the player is really hard to do. I feel like it limits the player's autonomy, and since you're constantly being exposited at and interrupted by the Rescue Corps anyway, it feels like you have the game sort of playing itself for you at points. This sentiment bleeds through the entirety of Pikmin 4, and definitely washes away a lot of the nuance from playthrough to playthrough. This is inarguably one of the worst and most baffling decisions that Pikmin 4 commits to, as it's not like the game can't handle all the Pikmin types out at once. We've seen Pikmin 4 pushed to its limits from many creators, and I'm positive that this decision was made with guiding the player in mind. It's one of the many ways that core Pikmin strategy is sort of erased from the game, and ironically, this is not even the biggest offender of how the gameplay of Pikmin 4 is watered down compared to the previous entries. I've done my best to sort of dance around this, but let's chat about the elephant in the room, or rather, the really large dog in the room. Oatchi is simultaneously one of the best additions to the franchise, and also one of the worst. Since we just spent a while critiquing the Pikmin type limitation, let's start with Oatchi's positives. First and foremost, Oatchi's a sort of Captain Pikmin hybrid, having the ability to command and throw a squad of Pikmin, but also being able to fight enemies and carry things by himself. Oatchi also, almost immediately, gains the ability to be used as a mount for your captain, and a safe space for your Pikmin. This comes with the ability to jump up ledges, the ability to swim over water with Pikmin on his back, and the ability to rush and pop Pikmin onto an enemy during combat. Having a second captain with different abilities from the first is a definite step in the right direction for the series, as it allows them to devise more complex and interesting puzzles for the player to conquer. And of course, Pikmin 4 was specifically designed with this mount in mind, as it features more complex terrain and specific obstacles that highlight Oatchi's strengths. The ability to jump is specifically really important, as previously almost everything in Pikmin took place on a single flat plane. Sure, there were hills and places to throw your Pikmin up to, but being able to add a whole second level to areas really diversifies what can be done with the terrain and strengthens the naturalistic feel of the game. Oatchi also has a frankly underutilized mechanic of being able to sniff out things similar to the dowsing system in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Usually this is just to find one or two buried treasure in an area or cave, but can also be used to locate a plethora of other things. I'm not the biggest fan of this mechanic, or frankly how it's used, but hey, giving the dog character the ability to sniff things out is intuitive, and frankly, it'd be weird if it weren't here in some shape or form. Oatchi's a breath of fresh air for Pikmin fans. He adds yet another marketable face to the lineup of characters, and strengthens the overall iconography of the IP. Cute characters sell merch, and it's clear that these merch sales make all the difference when a company's deciding whether or not to keep cranking out games for a given franchise. Y'all ever seen a Captain Falcon plushie? And you wonder why F-Zero hasn't had a completely new game in decades. Get purchasing! Oatchi's the face of Pikmin 4, and its most defining gameplay mechanic when compared to the other entries in the franchise. He's cute, useful, and provides the player with a number of abilities they wouldn't have access to otherwise. But that's about where my praise for Oatchi ends. As for all the positives that he brings to the franchise on paper, there are a number of very real negatives that seem to have been overlooked or outright ignored. Oatchi is broken, first and foremost, and not in like a he doesn't work kind of way, in like a Super Smash Bros. Brawl Meta Knight kind of way. He's a very strong tool that the players have access to right from the jump. Initially, Oatchi's only able to be utilized alongside the Pikmin that you command, and cannot function as a mount or separate captain. This is where Oatchi, in my humble opinion, is at his best. Once you get the ability to ride Oatchi and safely carry your entire squad on his back, you'll never want to go back. And that's sort of the problem. See, being able to ride Oatchi comes with an unforeseen consequence, but before we can talk about that consequence, we have to briefly talk about the Pikmin themselves. Pikmin are the snappiest they've ever been in regards to their speed and going to and from locations. Previously, the Pikmin would lag behind the player, with the trade-off for having such a large squad being the difficulty in maneuvering them efficiently. This is most prominent in Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2, as the following AI was improved drastically in Pikmin 3. But with Oatchi, no matter if you have 10 Pikmin following you or 100 Pikmin, they'll all sort of magnetically snap onto his back, as an 100% accurate, foolproof way of making sure that they stay completely out of danger. This whole mount concept drastically impacts how the player moves with their army, both inside and outside combat. Pikmin used to trip, get caught on edges and walls, get distracted by objects, and generally could be just kind of a hassle to move around in large groups. As the series evolved, the Pikmin AI improved, and there was an active effort to make them smarter and easier for the player to maneuver. This sounds like a no-brainer. Of course Nintendo would want to make the Pikmin smarter and smarter, but a lot of Pikmin's difficulty and charm comes from trying to maneuver your army of clumsy little plant creatures. With Oatchi, that whole dimension of controlling your Pikmin's position during combat is taken away from the player, and instead of having a large army targeted by a sprawling attack, they'll all be safely on the back of your dog away from harm. This is noticeable in moment-to-moment gameplay, but especially noticeable during certain fights in the game. I mean, without Oatchi here, this man-at-legs fight would definitely be difficult, but with Oatchi, I could just run circles around him with no consequences. Sure, while the Pikmin are on Oatchi's back, they're unable to utilize the charge mechanic, which makes its return from Pikmin 3. But why would you ever need to charge your Pikmin when almost immediately you'll have access to an even stronger ability you can use while riding Oatchi? Of course, I'm referring to Rush. Rush is one of the many tools that Rescue Pup Oatchi will have the ability to both learn and upgrade, and will definitely be the one you use the most frequently. Rush allows Oatchi to charge through pots and obstacles, as well as plow into enemies, which will then immediately throw all of the Pikmin onto his back, forward onto the enemy to damage them. Rush can mow down smaller enemies like nothing, and once upgraded into Mega Rush, can stun larger enemies while the Pikmin wail away on them. Mega Rush is the safest and most convenient way of dealing with enemies, and since there's relatively little reason to leave the comfort of Oatchi's back given his movement capabilities, most of combat can be boiled down to using this rush mechanic. There's a short cooldown time for it, and calling the Pikmin back can take time, but since again, they sort of magnetically snap onto Oatchi, this isn't really a problem if an enemy needs more than one rush to take it down, which in itself is a rarity. This leads to the combat feeling more samey than the previous entries, despite Pikmin 4 having the most expansive and diverse roster of enemies that the franchise has ever seen, which is a shame. There's some other factors we'll get to that can make combat feel kinda watered down, but for now, let's bring the focus back to the dog. As I mentioned, Oatchi can be upgraded over the course of your playthrough, as for every Castaway and Leafling you save, you earn one Pup Drive, which can be cashed in with Captain Shepard to train various skills. Besides Rush, Oatchi can have his buff skill upgraded from level 1, where he can carry 3 weight, to super buff level 3, where he can carry 100 units of weight. Oatchi's main attack, Chomp, does 35 per bite, compared to the standard Pikmin damage of 10, and can be upgraded all the way to Super Chomp, where he's doing 120 damage per bite. Oatchi can upgrade his digging ability all the way up to 52 times the normal speed. He can train to learn to pluck Pikmin even faster than the captain. He can train to increase his swimming speed and retrieve items from the water with his doggy paddle skill. He can be trained to heal himself over time, and he can train to learn how to go here, return to the base, and gather stray Pikmin with the command skill. In addition, Oatchi and the captain are both able to be upgraded by visiting Russ's lab, where the player can exchange materials for various elemental immunities and other miscellaneous upgrades. Having your captain immune to hazards is helpful, but having Oatchi become immune to hazards is outright game-breaking, and allows him to deal with every difficult encounter in the game. Oatchi can do a lot, and he can do a lot really well. He's your most powerful tool throughout the game, and it's no debate. Compared to your captain's sole ability to ride rails and charge Pikmin, and I guess go through these little tunnels, Oatchi sets himself apart as superior both in traversal and combat alike. Because the entire game is designed around Crypto the Superdog over here, this in turn gives the Pikmin themselves less opportunities to shine. But of course, the core of the game still revolves around utilizing your army to complete tasks and defeating enemies as efficiently as possible. And that's sort of the problem with Oatchi, is that not using him to his fullest potential really starts to show the problems with just trying to use the Pikmin. One of the main critiques of Pikmin 4 post-release is about the new auto-lock system that automatically snaps the player's cursor to the nearest enemy, obstacle, really just about everything. This is supposed to be a helpful aim assist feature, but unlike Pikmin 3 where you can sort of work around this locking feature, Pikmin 4 does not offer you the ability to turn this off. This usually works fine when there's only a couple things on screen at a time, but when there are large amounts of materials or enemies around, sometimes this auto-lock feature can get the player a little scrambled, and simply throwing your Pikmin on the correct thing can be a challenge. This is a really big problem, as so much of Pikmin's skill expression is about both moving your army efficiently and getting them to work as fast as possible. Combining this auto-lock feature with Oatchi's ability to safely maneuver with Pikmin anywhere, and you're looking at a whole bunch of systems that limit the player's autonomy. Auto-lock is a feature that I'm personally not a big fan of, as it can feel a little clunky and inaccurate while you're trying to play the game at a fast speed. And considering it's Pikmin, where you're incentivized to go as fast as possible, this extra frustration of auto-lock doesn't make the game harder in a good way. While it exists to make the game easier and to assist the player, this guiding hand is not welcome for veterans of the franchise like myself.
I didn't ask for this.
I know where I want to throw my Pikmin. I do not need the game to help me with that, but it does so anyway. Alright, now that I've touched on the main points of criticism about the changes made for Pikmin 4, let's talk about some of the good things, right? I mean, this game was in the works for almost a decade, and as the most highly anticipated entry in the franchise so far, let's be honest, they definitely delivered. First off, Pikmin 4 is gorgeous. Pikmin has always had a way of using both the environment and its tiny scale to its advantage when it comes to crafting a level, and Pikmin 4 does not slouch in this regard. The level design's at its finest, with areas that sprawl and incorporate both real-world structures and clever progression that makes the Pikmin world feel the most alive it's ever been. Everything from the foliage to the enemies have seen a glow up, and Pikmin 4 is one of the most aesthetically pleasing games I've ever had the opportunity to play. While the auto-lock system and the almost arbitrary Pikmin type limit certainly detract from the overall experience of the game, the bones of Pikmin 4 are nonetheless strong. You have to understand, I'm coming at Pikmin 4 with the very intimate knowledge of what makes a Pikmin game good, having played through the first 3 games so much. And although I have some problems with some of the decisions made, for the most part, in minute-to-minute gameplay, you don't have very much to complain about. The Pikmin are snappy and faster than ever, the enemy variety is better than ever, and many familiar faces are back from the previous games, including the Smoky Prog, Horned Cannon Beetle, Pearly Clamp, Mamuda, Jelly Floats, Emperor and Empress Bullblaxes, Fiery Bullblaxes, every Dweevil variant, Anode Beetles, Man at Legs, pretty much everything's back in some form except for the Gatling Groink, who I personally miss very much. Imagine the destruction they could have caused during the night missions. Oh man, a man can dream. This enemy roster comes of course with a number of new enemies, and even variants of previously known enemies. Ice enemies are all the rage in Pikmin 4, with Wallyhops, Bulborbs, and Blowhogs all getting new icy variants. Some of the more standout new enemies include the Shellcake family, who will flip and turn and try to crush Pikmin, the Tusk Blowhog, who charges like a bull and eats Pikmin, the Waddlequaff and Bog Swallow enemies, who will suck Pikmin in like a vacuum, the Gilmandui, who distract Pikmin with their golden shells, the Snoot Whackers, who use their trunks on offense and require Oatchi to defeat, and the Grubchucker, who is much scarier than he looks. Poor guy invested all his skill points into HP. Look at him. This is the most diverse collection of enemies we've ever had the luxury of facing down in a Pikmin game, and seeing everyone in crystal clear HD is really exciting. Pikmin 4 has had a lot of care put into it. It makes sure to engage the veterans of the series with its nostalgic lineup of enemies and callbacks to the previous 3 games, and also serves as a stepping stone for new fans of the franchise to discover the world of PNF 404 for themselves. Despite Oatchi sort of overstaying his welcome in the combat department and the aforementioned introduction of the auto-lock aiming feature as well as the 3 type limit, Pikmin 4's gameplay is genuinely very solid. There are some gripes I have with the choices made here, but they were made with a genuine effort to make the game more accessible to a wider audience. In my perfect Pikmin 4, the auto-lock aiming feature would be toggleable, the Pikmin type limit would be lifted, and the amount Oatchi could deal with would be much more reasonable. But we're stuck with what we got, and with no glimmer of hope for DLC or any kind of game-altering balance patch, this is what we have to work with. There's one thing about Pikmin that will never change though, and that's of course your ability to command and control an army of up to 100 little plant creatures. Pikmin 4 has a total of 9 types of Pikmin readily available for the player to use during the campaign, which is the most out of any of the Pikmin games before it. Pikmin 3 decided to omit whites and purples from the main campaign, leaving the player with only 5 types to utilize at any given time. I've previously made a tier list that covers how good a given Pikmin type is in each Pikmin game, so after I'm through discussing each individual type in Pikmin 4, I'm going to rank them based on their overall usefulness in the game, just like a little addendum to that list. Let's start with the types introduced in Pikmin 4, Ice Pikmin and Glow Pikmin. Now let's not even chat about the fact that I called both of these types making it into the game, but how do they function as the pushed Pikmin types of Pikmin 4? Ice Pikmin are first and foremost really cute, and are the second type available to the player during the story. Ice Pikmin give the player new strong abilities, including being able to freeze bodies of water for traversal, as well as being able to freeze enemies upon either doing enough damage or being eaten, similar to the poison ability of the White Pikmin. Ice Pikmin float in water, so they rarely drown, and they're the required type for a number of obstacles like the new Hydro Jellies and Ice Blocks that produce cold air. In addition, Ice Pikmin are semi-immune to the new bubble hazard, as if they're trapped, they freeze the bubble pretty quickly and get out much faster than other types. It's clear from the jump that much of the game is designed around the traversal and combat abilities that the Ice Pikmin offer, which is to be expected as Pikmin types are usually the strongest in their debut game. Plenty of Pikmin 3 was designed with rocks and wings in mind, and this desire to push the abilities of the new Pikmin types is evident in Pikmin 4 as well. Let's get it out of the way right now. Ice Pikmin are incredibly powerful, as their freezing ability functions like the Bitter Spray effect from Pikmin 2. This prevents enemies from moving, with the trade-off being that their corpses are no longer available to use for Pikmin generation. In addition, if an airborne enemy is frozen, they'll come crashing down to the ground and shatter, instantly defeating them. While losing Pikmin growth opportunities in exchange for safely dealing with these enemies seems like a fair trade-off, because you aren't able to utilize the enemies in caves anyway, the downside of the freezing effect is inconsequential most of the time. Sure, occasionally you'll want to avoid finishing things off with Ice Pikmin so you can utilize the bodies in the overworld, but there are so many ways to get Pikmin in Pikmin 4 that you never really need to be careful when wielding this ability. Having this freezing power almost always accessible definitely impacts the overall difficulty of Pikmin 4, as previously, this power was only available if you farmed berries or slurped up a Bitter Spray drop. There was always the chance of running out. You could say the same thing about running out of Ice Pikmin certainly, but since 5 out of 6 main areas basically require Ice Pikmin to traverse, and there are a lot of new Frosty variants of enemies, you're going to be seeing and using Ice Pikmin a ton. Generally, I'm a fan of the traversal opportunities that Ice Pikmin offer, as freezing bodies of water is both straightforward and satisfying, but I'm less enthused by their stranglehold on the combat of Pikmin 4. If they were given to you at a later point in the campaign, they may have felt less intrusive, but since they're available almost immediately, and given the length of Pikmin 4's campaign overall, they really kinda overstay their welcome in my opinion. There are a lot of ice-themed caves, and this is where Ice Pikmin are at their best, being immune to the cold air that permeates a floor, and being the only type of Pikmin outside of Glow Pikmin that are able to deal with the ice blocks that generate the freezing cold air. Combined with their ability to alter the Pikmin's carrying paths via freezing and unfreezing floors, these particular puzzle and strategy-based applications of Ice Pikmin are their most redeeming quality. All in all, Ice Pikmin definitely dampen the game's combat, but their other uses pretty much make up for this glaringly negative trait. When it comes to their usefulness, however, it's clear that Ice Pikmin, like Pikmin 2 Purples and Pikmin 3 Wings before them, land squarely in S tier, as their utility in and outside of combat is game-breaking and unparalleled compared to the other types in Pikmin 4. The second Pikmin type introduced in Pikmin 4 is the Ghost Pikmin, or Glow Pikmin? I'm checking my notes. They're called Glow Pikmin.
Glow Pikmin? Yo! Are they dead?
Let's go! He's a ghost!
That's totally.
Glow Pikmin are a very unique type of Pikmin that function entirely differently from the rest of the types available in Pikmin 4. For starters, the player's only introduced to Glow Pikmin once they've unlocked the Night Expeditions. Glow Pikmin are born from the Luminals, a sort of nighttime termite mound that functions as their onion. Glow Pikmin aren't really plants either, but rather a sort of ectoplasmic, spectral-like entity, shown by their ability to teleport to and from the active captain and straight up disappear into the air. Glow Pikmin don't utilize the enemy corpses like the other Pikmin, but rather a substance that resembles konpaito, which is a type of Japanese sugar candy, which I didn't even realize prior to researching for this video. I just thought it was a Mario Galaxy reference. Glow Pikmin are immune to all hazards, just like the Bulbmin before them, who, spoiler alert, will not be making their comeback in Pikmin 4, and have the ability to form together into something called a Glow Mob, which can be used to stun a large chunk of enemies with a burst of light. All of these traits together make it seem like Glow Pikmin would, like Ice Pikmin, be a staple in the combat of Pikmin 4, and perhaps even stronger than the Ice Pikmin. But that's really not the case. Sure, the Glow Pikmin are a powerful tool in combat, but since they're usually relegated to the Night Expeditions, where they're the only type used and combat is the only focus, it sort of balances itself out. Outside of Night Expeditions, Glow Pikmin can be summoned in caves using glow seeds, which are gained by successfully completing these Night Expeditions. I guess it's nice to have them as an option if you need to shore up your Pikmin numbers or weakness against any specific elemental hazard, but considering the fact Pikmin 4 auto-selects which Pikmin are optimal for a cave, and you have to either manually take in less than your maximum amount of Pikmin, or lose Pikmin in a cave, you're rarely going to see them utilized in casual playthroughs. Most often, Glow Pikmin are utilized in the Engulfed Castle, Freezing Inferno, and the Cavern for a King, as the limited types available to you in the first two, and the sheer length and difficulty of the third cave, are the only two situations where they feel at all necessary or helpful. They're decent for utility in these cases, being used to clear hazards and deal with elemental enemies, but they don't offer nearly the same strength in combat as when you're using 50 or more of them. Because of this, and their inability to be used on the surface of the planet during the daytime, 95% of the time you're using Glow Pikmin, you're only going to be using them during the Night Expeditions, limiting their overall usefulness and effectively making them more of a gimmick than a true full-fledged Pikmin type. Their physiology and impact on the lore, however, are far from gimmicky, as the glow sap they produce at the end of the night is pivotal in curing the leaflings from their leafified state. In addition, they're able to be thrown into the Pikmin's candy pop buds, meaning they do have a type of relationship with the classic onion-dwelling Pikmin types, but a sort of inverse one. There's a lot of fascinating questions posed by this relationship, and as a longtime Pikmin theorist myself, their inclusion's a good omen for future games and stories. Being able to explore the Pikmin planet at night for the first time is a huge deal, and I hope that future entries can really milk this more dangerous and mysterious version of PNF 404 for all it's worth. Glow Pikmin are a welcome addition to the franchise, and despite all their insane traits, like their immunity to every hazard, and their capability to form a glow mob, I can't put them higher than a B tier, as they're not used nearly as often as the other types of the game. When they are used, however, they're effectively just used as a utility type of Pikmin, kinda to shore up your numbers and deal with hazards. They'd be either A or S if you could use them in the overworld, but alas, their limited availability to the player holds them back in this ranking. Red Pikmin are the type of Pikmin you first have access to. Big shocker, and they function exactly as they have in previous games. Red Pikmin are respectable damage dealers and retain their immunity to fire, but for the first time since their introduction all the way back in 2001, Red Pikmin were given an additional ability. In certain levels, there are bonfire altars that produce a new type of item called a fire starter. Red Pikmin can pick up and carry these fire starters, and they can be used to efficiently deal with ice enemies, to warm up parts of a given sublevel, and to destroy dried plants, which are a new hazard for progression. Red Pikmin who are carrying this fire starter are unable to ride on Oatchi, and the starter has a timer before it burns out and have to get another one. I personally really like this new mechanic. Red Pikmin are my favorite type, and they've needed something more to do for the last couple decades, so to see them finally get a new toy like these fire starters was a welcome surprise. Utilizing these fire starters efficiently and trying to burn multiple things quickly with a single one is really satisfying, as the ticking health of the Firestarter is a sort of mini-game for the player to participate in. There's definitely some skill expression with this mechanic, and I personally found it really rewarding trying to burn things before the starter goes out and you have to pick up another one. I also really like how with these, the red Pikmin can sort of use an elemental attack, as certain enemies are damaged by the Firestarter itself. Frosty Bulborbs lose their protective shell, the Snowflake Fluttertail boss loses its impenetrable coat of ice, and other icy enemies straight up just lose a chunk of their health. Reds are a staple in Pikmin 4, and given that there are 8-ish types to balance, this new Firestarter mechanic really does a lot to improve their overall usefulness in game. There are plenty of fire enemies for them to deal with as well, including fiery Bulblaxes and pyroclasmic Slooches, as well as the new Scorchcake enemy. And with the introduction of the Sizzling Floor hazard, found primarily in caves and Dandori battles, red Pikmin have more to do than ever. I'm going to give red Pikmin from Pikmin 4 a respectable A ranking, as they're the best they've ever been since Pikmin 1. And considering there are a number of types to compete against in Pikmin 4 compared to Pikmin 1, this is the best they've ever looked in the franchise. Yellow Pikmin are a little bit of a different story, but that's okay, since they've consistently earned the Most Improved award since their debut in Pikmin 1. Yellow Pikmin are immune to electricity, can be thrown higher than other types, and have a much faster digging speed than other Pikmin types. Technically, this digging speed was buffed from Pikmin 3, as it used to be 2 times the speed of a normal Pikmin, and is now 4 times the speed of a normal Pikmin. However, there really isn't as much for Yellow Pikmin to do compared to the other types in the game. Yellow Pikmin, of course, are mostly used for clearing electric gates and dealing with electric-based enemies. Electricity has been buffed from Pikmin 3. It'll now put Pikmin on the same timer as the other hazards like fire, water, and poison before they perish. Just because electricity has been buffed though, doesn't detract from the fact that most of Yellow Pikmin's uses are directly competing with the star of the game, Oatchi. See, Oatchi's able to charge into walls and topple objects down from their elevated height, meaning that Yellow Pikmin are never really required to get these items. There are a few spots in the game where the object is buried on these higher ledges, but Bomb Rocks are also able to deal with buried objects on top of electric gates. It wasn't until researching for this video that I discovered that Pikmin 4 could be 100% completed without using Yellow Pikmin a single time. Of course, during a normal playthrough, these electrician duties will fall primarily to the Yellow Pikmin, since they'll often be a part of the recommended loadout. But it doesn't change the fact that they'll, in general, feel less useful than they have in the previous games. Yellow Pikmin are most likely the third type of Pikmin you'll find over the course of your playthrough, so early game, they'll earn a spot in your lineup by default. But given the 3 Pikmin type limit and the fact they're only recommended for 3 of the 6 areas of the game, 2 of which being the first 2, should tell you about their overall usefulness in the grand scheme of Pikmin 4. They're not all that bad necessarily, but compared to their uses in both Pikmin 3 and Pikmin 2, this is the least useful Yellows have been since the original Pikmin game. Because of this, Pikmin 4 Yellows land squarely in B tier for their overall usefulness in the campaign of Pikmin 4. I'd like to put them higher because they're not bad, but so much of their usefulness is directly undercut by Oatchi and other types of Pikmin. Blue Pikmin are at their strongest in Pikmin 4, despite also being the recommended type for only 3 areas of the game. But water seems to be much more of a prevalent hazard than in the previous entries. Many longtime fans of the series feel that Blue Pikmin were kind of tacked on to the campaign of Pikmin 3. Only being required for the second half of the Garden of Hope, and for cleaning up a couple fruit in the rest of the areas of the game. But those people must be satisfied with how much blue Pikmin have to do in Pikmin 4. Because so much of the game is designed around using ice Pikmin to freeze and unfreeze water, blue Pikmin are the exact complement to this, being able to retrieve treasure from under the water and deal with water elemental enemies. There is a lot of water in Pikmin 4, and blues are still the only type that are able to traverse these parts of the map effectively. Once Oatchi has upgraded his doggy paddle skill to level 3, he'll be able to dive in the water and retrieve treasure himself. But until you upgrade, blues are still the only type capable of doing this. They thrive in underwater combat, and are an all-around great type to have included in your squad, as you never know when there's going to be a puddle nearby with a treasure or a large body of water to explore. In addition to being able to traverse through large bodies of water, they're also the only type that can freely pass through the new Sprinkler hazard, which will automatically afflict any other type of Pikmin with the water element. This gives them another new obstacle to clear outside of the jets of water and the water elemental enemies, and helps give them even more to do in the grand scheme of things. Blues are a simple yet effective type of Pikmin, and given the prevalence of water in both the overworld and caves, they'll be instrumental in your everyday travel and treasure cleanup. For these reasons and more, the blue Pikmin from Pikmin 4 land in A tier as far as their usefulness overall. There is a lot of focus given to the original 3 Pikmin types, But as I mentioned, for the first time since 2004, purple and white Pikmin have been reintroduced to the main campaign of a Pikmin game. Purples saw an extreme falloff in Pikmin 3, compared to their prestigious performance in Pikmin 2. Their damage was reduced to that of a standard red Pikmin, their slam attack was taken away, but they still performed the animation anyway, and their wind resistance was taken as well, making them effectively only good for carrying large treasure in the mission mode. They also no longer had the ability to stun enemies, which was one of their most important traits. They were absolutely nerfed into the ground, and as such, Pikmin 3 purples were at the very, very bottom of C tier, the only type worse than them being a Puffman, who were included in the list as a meme. Pikmin 4, however, does the purple Pikmin justice, as many of their abilities have now been restored. Purple Pikmin still only do the same amount of damage as a red Pikmin, but their slam attack has been re-implemented, dealing heavy damage upon latching onto an enemy. This damage varies from enemy to enemy and functions similarly to the rock Pikmin's initial attack, but definitely puts the purples back on top as far as DPS or damage per second goes. Purple Pikmin have regained their wind resistance, and the larger variety of wind-using enemies means that this trait is technically better than ever too. Purples are normally first found as a candy pot bud in the Engulfed Castle, and are required only for a few treasures throughout the game. With Oatchi and a squad of purples, almost every enemy folds like paper, and their massive DPS and carry potential makes them almost always useful in your squad. You may not be using purples too much early game, but by the time you get to the post-game, they'll be a staple in your lineup for sure. One other small thing I want to mention about the purple Pikmin that's more subjective is just how strong they feel. When you first get access to a large number of them, pitching them like giant grimacing baseballs just feels so satisfying. I'm happy to see the purples getting the treatment they deserve from Nintendo, as their Pikmin 3 counterpart really left a lot to be desired. For these reasons and more, purples are going to receive an A tier ranking, as they're extremely strong in combat and for carrying things, but are still a far cry from their initial performance in Pikmin 2. White Pikmin are also present during the campaign of Pikmin 4, and frankly, they have a lot more to do than they even did during their debut game. In Pikmin 3, White Pikmin are essential whenever they're available during mission mode, as their quick movement and blistering carrying speed enable the player to collect those small piles of gold really quickly. That was basically the only use for White Pikmin in Pikmin 3, but in Pikmin 4, they, like the purples, have been given much more to do. Poison and mold are much more prevalent hazards than they were in Pikmin 2, and there are a good number of new enemies that are really difficult to deal with without a good squad of White Pikmin with you. Moldy Bulborbs, Moldy Slooches, Startle Spores, and Toxtools are all totally new enemies that basically require Whites to deal with effectively. We previously discussed how Oatchi can overcome electric enemies and hazards, leaving less for the Yellow Pikmin to do. But the poison enemies, in my opinion, are much more dangerous overall, so having a type of Pikmin to deal with them goes a much longer way in comparison. White Pikmin, of course, retain their ability to poison enemies upon being eaten, and for the most part, this is just as helpful as it was in the previous few games. You never want to lose Pikmin, but if you do, doing some chip damage or outright defeating an enemy is a nice consolation prize. White Pikmin are the speediest of all Pikmin types, and as such, they retain their uses like they did in mission mode, being able to carry things much faster than the other types of Pikmin. Even though White Pikmin still do the least amount of damage overall, this isn't what they're primarily used for. With the abundance of poison hazards, especially in the later half of the game, and their quick carrying speed, White Pikmin are definitely the best they've ever looked in the franchise and have the most to do in Pikmin 4 by a mile. For these reasons, I'm putting the White Pikmin as a solid B tier Pikmin type. They're the best they've ever been, but their limited availability and lack of proficiency in combat definitely hold them back from being an A tier ranking. Rock Pikmin are technically good in Pikmin 4. They're first found in the Kingdom of Beasts and the Blossoming Arcadia as wild Pikmin. Rocks were easily top tier in their debut game of Pikmin 3, but with the plethora of combat options that Pikmin 4 offers the player, their main use cases are drastically diminished. Rock Pikmin work differently in combat than the other types of Pikmin, as instead of flat damage on initial impact, each enemy has a certain number of hits they can take from the Rock Pikmin, so their damage is variable. However, in comparison to Pikmin 3, the damage that they do when they're charged at an opponent has been quadrupled, from 10 damage per Rock Pikmin to 40 damage per Rock Pikmin. This must have been done to compete with the heavy DPS of the Purple Pikmin, who outside of Oatchi and the Ice Pikmin are the most valuable asset in combat. While this definitely brings them up to speed with the higher power level the player has access to, on average, Rocks are definitely worse when compared to Pikmin 3. Even with this drastic rework of how they function in combat, Rock Pikmin find relatively little to do in the grand scheme of things in Pikmin 4. Sure, they're still helpful when facing enemies that can crush Pikmin, but the crystal hazard has all but been removed, as there's really only a handful of mandatory crystal gates found throughout the game. Interestingly, the Crystal Gate is the only type of barrier that Oatchi himself isn't capable of breaking through, so the Rock Pikmin actually earned some points for this niche use case. Even though Rock Pikmin are a recommended type for 2 out of 6 of Pikmin 4's areas, they really aren't required for more than dealing with 1 or 2 stray Scutterchucks or a Crystal Gate, the former of which you'll probably just run through with Oatchi, as it's easily the most efficient way of dealing with them. Using Rock Pikmin as your primary damage dealers is certainly effective, but it can get messy with how they bounce back off enemies compared to the Purple Pikmin, who latch on and never let go. I kinda see Rock Pikmin in Pikmin 4 as a sort of beginner-friendly Pikmin type, as being immune to crushing is a big deal, and having them function with Oatchi as an all-purpose shotgun can absolutely delete enemies. But besides these traits, there's really not a whole lot of reason to run Rock Pikmin in your squad. If you're newer to the Pikmin series, you might find their inability to be crushed as really useful, but for long-time players, you're rarely going to be putting your Pikmin in danger like that anyways. This may seem harsh, but rocks are going to end up in a low B tier, as they're barely required to get through the game, and the good traits they do have are overshadowed by both Purple Pikmin and Oatchi. If there were more hazards or crystal enemies that only they could have dealt with, they'd definitely end up in A tier, but unfortunately, they were definitely given the short end of the stick in this entry. Speaking of the short end of the stick, Winged Pikmin arguably got the worst treatment out of every Pikmin type in the game. Winged Pikmin are discovered in the below-grade discotheque in the Serene Shores, but they are only required for the last area of the game, the Primordial Thicket. Wings have always been known for their ability to carry treasure in more efficient ways, and their proficiency in aerial or elevated combat. In Pikmin 3, wings were the most useful type of Pikmin, and the game really started to open up once you finally add them to your arsenal. Pikmin 4 brings back almost nothing that made the winged Pikmin useful in the first place. There are no fluke weeds, no bamboo gates, no more clipboards, so their specific hazards have all but been removed. That leaves them with their pathing and carrying abilities, and to my surprise, they actually have seen a buff when it comes to their carrying speed, becoming that of a normal Pikmin's. The main problem with winged Pikmin is that the game was not designed with these advantages in mind, and oftentimes they'll take the same path as any other type of Pikmin when carrying treasure or loot. There are definitely some shortcuts that winged Pikmin can take, but for the most part, there's no increase in efficiency by utilizing them for this purpose, unlike purples or whites. Combine this with their weak damage output and their lack of basically anything to do, they're easily the least useful type, and you'll rarely find them in your squad. Winged Pikmin can be used to get certain objects that are stuck in the mud in the Primordial Thicket, and their flight allows them to work against the conveyor belts in those specific levels in the caves, but outside of these niche uses, they really are shells of their former selves. Winged Pikmin in Pikmin 4 are a low C tier for all of these reasons, and especially given the 3 type limit, you'll only find them in your squad if you follow the game's recommended loadouts upon leaving caves, or you just really like the color pink. All in all, outside of the Ice Pikmin who are really good and the Winged Pikmin who are really bad, the rest of the Pikmin types are balanced fairly well over the course of the playthrough, and that in itself is definitely an accomplishment. We've briefly touched on the Pikmin AI in the gameplay section where it was relevant, but I think it's important to discuss some of the smaller things that I've noticed about how these Pikmin behave in minute-to-minute gameplay. Pikmin are technically smarter than ever. But one of my smaller gripes in Pikmin 4 comes from the break that happens once you throw the exact number of Pikmin needed to carry an object on said object. Let's say you're trying to carry a treasure that takes 15 Pikmin. You either chuck or charge the Pikmin, and only the exact number necessary will grab on it first. While I understand this was put in place to help the player more efficiently manage their numbers, it really feels like another way the game kind of limits your autonomy. This break in the action can result in some clunky feeling interactions, especially when there are multiple different objects close together that you're trying to pick up. You'll get there by throwing and spamming charge, but this really leads to an impreciseness that's hard to ignore. Pikmin have had their movement speed buffed overall, so sometimes they'll lag behind treasure as it's being carried too fast. This has always been somewhat of an issue in the series, but the Pikmin 4 Pikmin are seriously tenacious, and will sometimes follow a treasure while trying to pick it up for a very long distance. This exacerbates the problem from the previous entries, but honestly, this weakness can just be chalked up to the Pikmin's charm, as this is just another type of distraction that can cause them to go idle. Speaking of idle, there's a new piece of gear that you can buy from the lab called the Idler's Alert, that once used will direct all Pikmin not currently doing a task to the place that the Idler's Alert was used. On my first playthrough of Pikmin 4, I didn't really use the Idler's Alert.
Do the Idler Alert. That seems huge.
But on subsequent playthroughs, it's easy to see how this single piece of equipment offers the player an absolutely insane ability to optimize their gameplay. Being able to call all idle Pikmin on the map to a given spot is really powerful, and is something that I didn't even know I needed prior to Pikmin 4. It gives the player access to so many more options when it comes to how they can direct their Pikmin, and is in my eyes a welcome surprise to the Pikmin management. And let's be honest, the Pikmin management aspect is really at its peak in Pikmin 4. The game is so carefully designed in such a way that it really encourages you to multitask, and there's so many tasks that the Pikmin can autonomously do now. Pikmin can build structures similar to Pikmin 3, but the material used can come from these crystals you'll find literally everywhere in the game. This material can come from broken gates, from enemies, and sometimes is just stacked neatly in huge piles for the taking. This material can be used to build bridges, slopes, climbing walls, faucet handles, and gives the Pikmin yet another thing to be able to do autonomously. Pikmin can collect these materials, build these structures, harvest berries, break down walls, dig for treasure or items, and of course, transport enemies and collectibles back to base all on their own. And with this much for them to do at any given moment, being able to delegate tasks efficiently is critical in making the most of your time. This is especially true if you have a limited number of Pikmin, either caused by a lack of Flarlick early game, or if you're given a small number during a Dandori challenge. Being able to squeeze every ounce of potential out of your Pikmin squad and minimizing downtime is the core guiding principle behind Pikmin's gameplay, and this strength is emphasized to the highest degree in Pikmin 4. There is nothing quite like completing a task at the same time as collecting a treasure, or having exactly enough Pikmin with you to carry a treasure so you don't have to run all the way back to base. These small rewarding moments are super prevalent in Pikmin 4, and it's clear the game was designed to highlight this specific part of Pikmin's gameplay loop. And here's the thing, the Pikmin of Pikmin 4 are absolutely cut out for this higher pace of play. Outside of the minor lapse in control that might occur when you're targeting many things at once with autolock, the Pikmin are the most sprightly that they've ever been. Pikmin will rubber band toward the captain or Oatchi when they're whistled. They're able to be tagged rather easily to alert them back into your squad, and their improved pathfinding has them making runs right back to the leader that the GameCube Pikmin players can only dream of. Because of the overall length of Pikmin 4's campaign and the plethora of side modes, you'll be using a good mix of the available Pikmin types. They're optimized, efficient, and snappy, and controlling them for the most part has been the easiest it's ever been in the series, and that's a huge plus. Now that we've taken a look at the story, the characters, and the Pikmin themselves, how does it all come together to make a cohesive campaign? Well, in order to chat about what sets Pikmin 4's progression apart from the previous entries, let's look at how the Pikmin games up to this point have played out. In Pikmin 1, you're allowed to access a new area once you've collected a certain number of ship parts. 1 for the Forest of Hope, 5 for the Forest Navel, 12 for the Distant Spring, and 29 for the final trial. Given that there's a total of 30 ship parts, the game lets you into these new areas with relatively few total parts collected, most likely leading to the player having to backtrack and revisit old areas, even though they have these new ones unlocked. In Pikmin 2, progression is tied to specific key treasures, the Spherical Atlas and the Geographic Projection respectively, and the final area opens up upon paying off the 10,000 Poco debt. Like Pikmin 1, you'll be tasked with revisiting old areas to finish clearing caves and overworld treasures, as well as to gain access to the blue Pikmin, assuming you're not a pro and did the scale puzzle glitch. In Pikmin 3, progression's directly tied to the communication devices dropped from the boss of each area. Notably, Pikmin 3 has less backtracking than the previous two entries, as the only fruit you're unable to get the first time through an area will require blue or winged Pikmin, neither of which will be unlocked until you start messing around with Louie and you get access to the part of the Garden of Hope. In Pikmin 4, especially the early game, there aren't these similar barriers for progression. In order to unlock a new area, you simply need to collect enough Sparklium from the treasure and enemies, and complete the area's Dandori battle. It doesn't matter how you reach the Sparklium threshold, only that you do so. This nonlinear progression permeates the first half of Pikmin 4, and allows the player to choose which caves and treasures they'd like to get first, instead of being railroaded to the next obvious point. In addition, Pikmin types are able to be discovered in almost any order if you go far enough out of your way. Wild Pikmin can be found in caves, so you don't need access to an onion in order to gain more of a certain type. This is drastically different from the other Pikmin games, as normally you'd need to find a Pikmin's onion before you can begin to utilize their specific type advantage. This open style of progression mostly helps Pikmin 4 feel distinct from the previous entries, although with it comes some notable drawbacks. In Pikmin 4, there's no real need to backtrack to an area you've already explored, as most likely you'll be able to 100% it on your first go through. There's no need to use Pikmin types unlocked later in the campaign in the first few areas, as they're able to be fully cleared with just the recommended types. For instance, there's nothing for rocks, wings, purples, or whites to do in the Sun-Speckled Terrace, so there's no need to come back to the area with them in tow. Maybe it's just my completionist nature, but I have trouble moving on to the later areas until I've completely cleared the one that I'm already working on. It'd be different if upon discovering an area, you were forced to explore it, but Pikmin 4 lets you take the exploration at your own pace, and notably doesn't have any type of day limitation or time limit outside of the 15 minutes you're given day to day. The unlock requirements for the first 2 areas are just about having enough Sparklium as well as completing a Dandori battle, but in order to proceed to the hero's hideaway, you'll also have to complete 3 night expeditions in order to find and cure Bernard. You can 100% all 3 areas without having to do a single night mission once. After you rescue and cure Captain Olimar from the hero's hideaway, the Giant's Hearth will unlock. And to unlock the Primordial Thicket, you'll have to save both Don Bergman and Yorkie. I think that with the size of Pikmin 4 and the sheer amount of content the player has to work through in order to get 100%, this non-linear progression does a lot of heavy lifting in differentiating playthrough to playthrough. You'll still have to work through the same caves, Dandori challenges, and Dandori battles, but being able to do it in almost any order the player wants is a smart way to keep the player engaged. I think that specifically the decision to include Dandori challenges directly in the campaign is an awesome way to break up the exploration-heavy gameplay, with glimpses into what truly makes the Pikmin series tick. We'll touch more on the content of these Dandori challenges later, but essentially they serve as Pikmin 4's mission mode. There's one other means of progression that I've yet to touch on, and that's the system for gear upgrades as well as item acquisition. And this system, I'm less enthused by overall. Previously, important gear was found either in a secluded location or dropped directly from an enemy or boss. But in Pikmin 4, pretty much every major upgrade is tied to the lab that Russ is in charge of. In order to get any meaningful upgrade to your gear, you'll have to spend raw material at Russ's lab. While I applaud the developers for allowing the player yet another way to maximize their resources and decide what is and is not important to upgrade at any given time, I can't help but feel like this robs each upgrade of its importance. What do you think feels better for the player? Fighting through a cave full of fire and defeating the boss, giving the player an item that makes them finally immune to that fire, or by scrolling down, clicking, and purchasing this ability? Alright. I feel like there's a massive missed opportunity for these upgrades, as having them be held by bosses at the end of caves would add yet another reason for a player to prioritize or deprioritize exploring a given cave. These upgrades could even be tied to the Dandori challenges for all I care, but earning them through gameplay rather than having to just spend material would be one thing that could drastically improve Pikmin 4's progression overall. I don't mind the ability to craft items with the material, as having access to extra bomb rocks or ice blasts can be helpful in minute-to-minute gameplay, but having important upgrades be flat out listed for purchase doesn't make me feel like I've earned them. Imagine a world where these upgrades were treasures like in Pikmin 2, and in order to earn them, you'd have to fight through a specific cave or boss. I think that would even further incentivize players to explore the world more thoroughly, as along with all the treasure you get from caves, you'd get something tangibly helpful for your playthrough as well. Alas, that's not the direction that Pikmin 4 decided to take, opting to instead reward the player with high-value treasure at the end of a cave. This works fine as a reward for clearing caves, but I can imagine a world where the alternative is the case, and oh boy is it so much sweeter. Pikmin 4 offers a number of ways for the player to feel like they're making progress, whether through collecting Flarlick, collecting and using the material currency, rescuing castaways, curing leaflings, upgrading Oatchi, and just straight up gathering treasure. The freedom granted to the player to prioritize any of the above tasks is reminiscent of open world games, and no matter what you end up doing, there's always going to be some way in which Pikmin 4 decides to reward you. There are 6 different areas you'll unlock throughout Pikmin 4's campaign, and each of them are substantially larger than any of the areas previously seen in the series, outside of maybe Pikmin 3. Before you can even begin exploring these areas, though, each in-game day begins at the Rescue Corps base camp, which is established as soon as you rescue both Colin and Shepard in the tutorial. The Rescue Corps base camp is a small nook in the Sun-Speckled Terrace that offers the player a reprieve from the timed gameplay each day offers. At the base, you can chat with rescued castaways, purchase upgrades and items from Russ's lab, train Oatchi's skills with Shepard, and also grow a small number of Pikmin with the pellet posies that infinitely spawn. I rarely found myself grinding my Pikmin numbers in this area, but having the option to do so in the first place for novice players is definitely nice. The base camp increases in size and comes alive the more castaways you rescue, and becomes the hub for replaying Dandori battles and Dandori challenges, as well as the hub for a couple of extra modes that we'll get to in a bit. The base camp is simple and homey. There's chatter from some of the NPCs about building houses on PNF 404, and initially, I expected the base camp to be home to a number of buildings for the castaways to settle in while they wait for the player to rescue everyone from the planet. Instead, they just sort of stand around waiting for the player to come talk to them. Talking to these castaways often results in a side quest that rewards materials for collecting onions, flowering Pikmin, defeating enemies, basically the stuff you'd already be doing, even if there weren't some quest to motivate you. There's not a ton to do at the base camp, and most likely you'll only be here for a minute or two at a time, but if you choose to explore and chat with every character like I did for this analysis, you'll find it holds a lot to offer when it comes to both characterization and world building. This brings us to the very first area you'll be let loose in to explore, the Sun-Speckled Terrace. The Sun-Speckled Terrace is a quaint, beginner-friendly area that mostly shelters the player from the true dangers of PNF 404. There are a select few enemies strewn about in the overworld, the most dangerous of which are the normal red bulborbs, which, yes, I consider to be more dangerous than the porquillin, so combat isn't really a major focus for the player just yet. This noticeable lack of enemies is complemented by the fact that the player only begins with the ability to control 20 Pikmin, so it's not like you're at full capacity to deal with them anyways. On day 1, Oatchi has yet to hit his growth spurt, meaning that you're uniquely limited in how you can progress through the terrace initially. Since you're unable to control Oatchi or jump up ledges, much of the area is inaccessible to the player until that happens, meaning the terrace is one of the only areas that cannot be completed in a single day's time. The player initially lands at the Ancient Arch's base, and with no other direction to go, they'll head toward the dirt wall on the far east side of the map. After breaking it down, most players will venture into the Last Frost Cavern to discover Ice Pikmin as well as their first Flarlick, but players can forego this venture to go back to the west to the Rugged Scaffold base, where you're introduced to the concept of moving your base from location to location. This can be done in every area of the game, as well as in certain sublevels and caves, and offers the player another option in regards to optimizing their playthrough and reducing the downtime it can take to carry items back to base. From the Rugged Scaffold, you could take the long path around past a couple dwarf bulborbs to another closed-off section that taunts the player with another Flarlick and the Crackling Cauldron, where you'll most likely find yellow Pikmin for the first time. Once you gain the ability to build structures, almost everything the terrace offers is immediately accessible, provided you have enough raw material. Aesthetically, the Sun-Speckled Terrace is very simple and grounded in its presentation. Pikmin 4's new camera style does a lot to make the terrace feel larger than it actually is, as structures like the bench and the wagon wheel showcase the true scale of the Pikmin world very effectively. This messy garden does a nice job at establishing the new norm of what a Pikmin area should look and feel like, although personally, I must say I find the terrace to be the blandest of the new areas. After a few playthroughs, you start to understand that the quaintness of the terrace is on purpose, and that it was designed specifically to teach the player about all these new mechanics in an orderly timeline. The terrace has 5 different caves, the most of any area, but as a trade-off, they're all relatively short and simple. The first cave you'll most likely traverse, as I mentioned, is the Last Frost Cavern. This is a 1-floor cave, but it's fairly dense with things to discover. There's a Flarlick, a Castaway, and of course the aforementioned wild Ice Pikmin that you'll have to fight a new Frosty Blowhog to acquire. There's pots to break with Oatchi, and the first appearance of the Hydro Jelly hazard. Honestly, this is a fairly memorable cave because of how soon you discover it and the plethora of new things it has to offer the player. It's a shame it's only a single floor, as with a name like Last Frost Cavern, you'd expect it to house an ice puzzle of some kind, outside of just the Hydro Jellies, but it's short, it's sweet, and to the point. The next cave the player will most likely stumble upon is the Crackling Cauldron, and this is really where you'll start to get in the swing of things with your Pikmin. Like I mentioned, this is where you'll find yellow Pikmin for the first time, and you'll find a whopping 20 of them over the stretch of 2 sublevels. The first level features a number of fiery blowhogs and shearwigs, reminiscent of the Forest Navel's selection of enemies, as well as an electric gate which you'll use your newly acquired yellow Pikmin to dismantle. The second sublevel heavily features the new sizzling floor obstacle, the new Scorchcake enemy, as well as houses the first instance of a second base location inside of a cave. Red Pikmin prove instrumental the entire way through this cave, and yellow Pikmin see some notable use as well. This is the most meaty of the caves that the terrace has to offer, and definitely is my favorite in this location.
The next cave the player takes on can vary, but I most often find myself in the Industrial Maze. This is a new style of sublevel that borrows characteristics from Pikmin 3's Clockwork Chasm, and we'll be seeing a fair amount of these conveyor belt puzzles going forward, so the Industrial Maze serves as sort of a tutorial for this mechanic. There's no enemies in this entire cave, instead choosing to test the player's puzzle solving ability rather than their combat skill.
That being said, these puzzles are fairly easy, and with Oatchi's ability to rush in the opposite direction of the moving walkways, neither sublevel offers anything that substantial. Yellow Pikmin will find some good use here, and there's a decent chunk of high sparklium treasure, but overall I find the Industrial Maze to be mostly forgettable. The Hectic Hollows fare slightly better, as it showcases the ability to build inside of caves for the first time, and offers a large number of wild ice Pikmin. This is probably the first time you use ice Pikmin to freeze a body of water in order to retrieve this Mama Doll head from the island on the first sublevel, and further showcases their proficiency in combat by presenting you with some Bulborbs to beat up. The second sublevel features some more Hydro Jellies, as well as the new Tusked Blowhog, but in general it's pretty straightforward. This is another cave that's short and sweet, and it provides the player with a good number of ice Pikmin to add to their squad early game. For a name like Hectic Hollows, however, it's relatively tame. The last cave in the terrace is the Aquiferous Summit, which, I'll be honest, is pretty uneventful. You'll use ice Pikmin to freeze bodies of water in your quest to collect treasure, but it's showcased to you in a much more tutorial-like setting than the Hectic Hollows, which is strange, because you'll most likely enter the Hollows first. The second sublevel has an iron fence puzzle and some sizzling floors, and is much more fleshed out, but the lack of any enemies makes this feel like more of a tutorial-style cave. The Aquiferous Summit's required to get through in order to access the fourth base, the Distant Summit, but I feel like it would benefit from having its position be swapped with the Hectic Hollows. All in all, a pretty uninteresting cave, and the only one I wondered why it existed in the first place. Emerging from the Aquiferous Summit puts the player at the most vertical point of the map, and has them face down the Porquillin, the only mini-boss in the entire overworld of the Sun-Speckled Terrace. Fighting the Porquillin is like the first thing you do in the tutorial, so this encounter feels kinda special. Like, you've completed your rookie training course, and you're now caught up to speed and skill with Olimar, the character who you were controlling in the tutorial. The only Dandori challenge in the Sun-Speckled Terrace is accessed by freezing a small pond with 20 ice Pikmin. The Dandori challenges are arguably my favorite part of Pikmin 4, and even though this is the first one and you'd expect it to be easy, the beauty of Dandori challenges is that even though they're easy to clear, they're hard to master. Because these challenges don't eat into your daytime like the caves do, there's no reason not to grind these out as soon as you discover them if you want to. My only gripe with this specific Dandori challenge is once you've completed it and retrieved a Leafling, if you take the recommended types of Pikmin out, you won't have enough ice Pikmin to actually freeze the water to get back to base. I tend to mash through the loading screens of Pikmin 4, and that can lead me to accidentally skipping past the Pikmin selection menu and end up left with the recommended types. This is a silly little detail, but I'm sure other players have had this exact same thing happen to them. The first Dandori battle versus Olimar is the trial run, and it's painfully easy, even to Platinum. If you ever pay attention to what the AI Olimar does in battle, it can be hilarious. Sometimes he'll defeat an enemy and not pick up the body afterwards. Sometimes he'll just run up to you, stand in place, and then scuttle off elsewhere. It's really funny to just do absolutely nothing and just let the computer do their thing in the background. You'll start to notice the cracks in the AI really quickly. The only other things left to discover in the terrace are the yellow onion behind the paper bag close to the Dandori challenge, as well as a blue onion buried in an elevated area that's visible from the Dandori battle's entrance. This is meant to be retrieved after the player has either upgraded Oatchi, found enough Flarlick, or found blue Pikmin in the blossoming Arcadia, but it can be accessed as early as day 2 by using 30 ice Pikmin to freeze the small pond, building the climbing wall, unfreezing the pond, digging up the onion and transporting it to this small ledge, refreezing the pond, and finally having Oatchi rush against it over and over until it's out of the water and can be safely retrieved by any Pikmin type. This is a really silly way of getting the onion early, and is definitely rewarding if you could pull it off successfully, as being able to grow blue Pikmin right off the bat in the next area is really helpful. And that's kind of it for the Sun-Speckled Terrace. It's a simple, quiet area that carefully eases the player into the core mechanics of the game. While aesthetically, it's the least interesting of Pikmin 4, and can sort of feel dull on repeat playthroughs, especially given its general lack of enemy diversity and constant droning piano, it's only the first level of the game, and it offers plenty for the player to explore and collect. The Blossoming Arcadia is the second area visited in the campaign, and offers a much more lively take of a garden compared to the terrace before it. This area is littered with falling sakura petals and features a large body of water at the center, breaking the area up into something like a set of spirals feeding into the center.
Upon landing for the first time at the Fragrant Ravine base, the player can travel down the hill to the unfinished clay bridge, where they'll discover another Flarlick at the misshapen pond base. From there, it's really up to the player what they want to tackle first. If Oatchi already has the ability to swim, they can traverse relatively freely, but if you made it to the area on day 4 without having first tried drowning your doggo, you might not be able to swim the first day here. The next Dandori battle with Olimar is immediately accessible, so you can do that first. Close by, there's another clay bridge that'll lead you around to the west elevated side of the map. You could wait for the bridge to finish and proceed north to the back half of the area, or you could proceed east where there's a loop with some downy snagrets and some raw material. With some precise throwing and charging, you can also use yellows to topple the elevated paper bags immediately, opening up almost everything at once for you. The training wheels are mostly off at this point, and there's a much bigger variety of enemies to oppose you. There are downy snagrets, bearded amprats, a few of the new wattlequoth enemies, and a couple of newly redesigned creeping chrysanthemums, which definitely didn't surprise me on my first playthrough.
What? What?
Many of the enemies follow this sort of hiding theme, with the singular burrowing snagret, the joust mites, and the skitter leaves, showing that there's danger lurking underneath the beautiful exterior of the area. The Arcadia is more complex to navigate than the Terrace, and has the player deal with all kinds of new obstacles, including the ice walls, which of course can only be dealt with by ice Pikmin, this lawn sprinkler by the Sunwash Plateau base, which can either be turned off by building a faucet knob, or traversed through with blue Pikmin, and these potted mushrooms, which I wish were used more throughout the game. If you skip the yellow onion that's available in the Terrace, there's another one located at the end of one of these spirals, but if you already have the yellow onion, it'll instead give you 20 more yellow Pikmin, which is a neat consolation prize. As I mentioned, outside of the Battle in the Box Dandori battle, which can immediately be accessed, there are 2 Dandori challenges in the Arcadia, one accessed by scaling a climbing wall, and the other accessed by bombing a stone wall. Unlike the previous Pikmin games, items are utilized directly by the captain and can be accessed at any time from your pack. The Blossoming Arcadia is home to 4 caves, the first of which you'll most likely discover is the Drafty Gallery, which is one of the less interesting caves the game has to offer. The first sublevel is a simple Pikmin 2 style layout with a few downy snagrets. The second gets more interesting with some fire hazards, some fiery blowhogs, and the first appearance of a candy pop bud, in this case being an ice candy pop bud. Did you guys know if you throw a bomb rock into a candy pop bud, it just spits the bomb right back out? I didn't before my research. Dalmo alludes to this in the Picklepedia, but I haven't tested it until right now, and sure enough, the third floor of the Drafty Gallery is easily the most memorable, as it shows you the exit upon loading in, but requires you to geyser over to the other side of the map to actually do anything with the level. You kind of work backwards toward the base, and I rather like this one. The fourth sublevel is easily the most disappointing. The boss of the cave is a single puffy blowhog. You'd think after 4 whole floors of a cave, you'd be greeted by more than one regular enemy that can just be deleted by ice Pikmin, but I guess they can't all be winners. The Sightless Passage is a much more interesting take on the idea of the Aquiferous Summit, in that you have to pass through here to access an elevated area in the overworld with some more treasure. This is a single floor cave, but it's pretty expansive, and comes with the added effect of being much darker than any of the caves explored so far. The player has the option of purchasing the headlamp from Russ's lab, but it's not required to get through the cave. This spooky, dark atmosphere works really well, as it's complemented by the light emitted from the enemies, the sizzling floors, and the electric gate. There's not a ton of treasure here, and there's no boss, but it's still very memorable nonetheless. The secluded courtyard is the main cave of the Blossoming Arcadia, as you'll find not only a Flarlick buried on the 3rd sublevel, but also a good chunk of wild blue Pikmin. This most likely is the first time you'll find blue Pikmin, and if you haven't already collected the Flarlick in the overworld here, this extra boost to your squad's makeup goes a long way. The secluded courtyard is aesthetically pretty nice, as the presence of ice, water, and electric elements make for an interesting combination. This will be the first time you encounter the Sun Squish, another new enemy that follows the Arcadia's theme of hiding in plain sight. When I first saw this enemy, I was really charmed, as any funny style of mimic in my Pikmin games gives me some kind of rush I can't explain. The first sublevel is a simple ice Pikmin puzzle with a metric butt ton of skitter leaves around. The second sublevel is significantly more interesting, seeing the return of the Dweevil family and classic Pikmin 2 cave shenanigans we've all come to begrudgingly love.
Oh, yep.
The third sublevel of the secluded courtyard is where you'll find the Flarlick and a whole family of Sun Squishes, as well as some desiccated skitter leaves that fall from the sky. This whole cave is coated with some fun surprises, and really feels intentional from the developers. The final sublevel is where one of Pikmin 4's new bosses makes its debut, the Foolix.
Obviously, the Foolix was interpolated from the idea of the Ghoulics, and having it emerge from an unsuspecting nectar pile is a stroke of genius on the developer's part. We've already been exposed to fake nectar eggs in the cave, so the natural next step is a fake nectar pile. The Foolix will charge forward trying to swallow any Pikmin in its mass, and after it's tired, it'll reveal a tail which your Pikmin can grab onto to split it apart and finally do some damage. The Foolix isn't all that dangerous, but unprepared players may find that it offers the biggest challenge so far in their playthrough. This mechanic of latching a certain number of Pikmin onto an enemy in order to take it down is highly exploitable with purple Pikmin in your party, but at this stage in the game, you won't have access to them, and you'll only have around 50 to 60 Pikmin, so the first encounter with the Foolix is going to be the most difficult encounter with the Foolix. Generally, the secluded courtyard is detailed, vibrant, and it's a lot of fun to play through, and the new boss fight is just the cherry on top. Finally, the last cave in the Blossoming Arcadia is the Kingdom of Beasts, and is oddly enough the second longest cave in the game, only besides the final one. This is a clear play on both the Hole of Beasts and the Bulblax Kingdom from Pikmin 2, both of which are originally found in the similarly floral Awakening Wood. The first sublevel is fire themed, with a simple loop and a couple of red Bulborbs. 10 more reds can be found on this floor to boost your numbers for this gauntlet of a cave. The next sublevel is dotted with orange Bulborbs and features the first appearance of the rock Pikmin, making them the 5th type discovered in the campaign if you choose to 100% each area the first time through. This is of course complemented by the sublevel having a number of crystal walls, and the very next sublevel where you'll fight an Empress Bulblax for the first time. Luckily, there's not any Bulborb larvae to worry about in this fight, so if you wanted to, you could just let your 10 rocks square right up to her. Wait a few minutes, and she'll go quietly into the night. The 4th sublevel features a mix of fire and crystal hazards, as well as a couple of Whip-Tongue Bulborbs and the new Albino Dwarf Bulborb. There's also another 5 wild rock Pikmin on this sublevel who are engaged in combat with the Whip-Tongue Bulborb. This can make it difficult to approach the Whip-Tongue Bulborb and defeat them. The Whip-Tongue, along with every other variant of the mid-sized Bulborbs, have had their eye hurt boxes removed, meaning that pretty much every Bulborb has been buffed in their transition to Pikmin 4, and I think this buff is the most noticeable for the Whip-Tongue. The 5th sublevel is the first appearance of the Spotty Bulbear, who's definitely one of the more dangerous enemies in Pikmin 4. There's another 10 wild rock Pikmin here, making a total of 25 of them found in this cave. These will be the last rock Pikmin you see for quite some time, so if you're looking for heavy damage dealers and can't wait for purples, you can always come back to the Kingdom of Beasts and grind them. Lastly, sublevel 6 has a duo of Emperor Bulblaxes, which can offer the player a substantial challenge, especially if you don't deal with one before they scream and wake the other up. I'd argue that even though the Emperor Bulblax is still mostly a joke, it's improved substantially from its last appearance from Pikmin 2. Toward the back half of the sublevel is another reference to Pikmin 2, with the raised treasure on a platform guarded by both fire and water. The Kingdom of Beasts is probably the most fleshed out of the caves that we've seen so far, as each floor offers you a distinct taste of almost every type of Bulborb. If you chose to come in with the recommended full squad of reds, you might be in for a more difficult time, as I mentioned, the Bulborbs have pretty much been buffed across the board. It's definitely worth it to bring 10 or 20 Ice Pikmin for the sole purpose of helping out with combat, as the Whip-Tongue and Bulbear encounters on the later floors are specifically dangerous. There's a noticeable spike in difficulty here, so it's definitely a very memorable cave, although it is strange that it's the second longest cave in the game, for only being in the second area. And that's the Blossoming Arcadia broken down for y'all. I'm pretty indifferent to the Arcadia personally, as it's kind of a generic flower garden area that follows another generic garden area, but I can see why people like it. By far my biggest complaint with the area is the fact that you can't slide down the giant elephant the area taunts you with.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Oh yeah, it's time for the Serene Shores, which in my opinion is the area where Pikmin 4 really finds its identity. Landing at the Blossoming Dune base, the player immediately can spot Leafling Olimar across a pond that at this point in the day requires 40 Ice Pikmin to freeze. It's possible you'll have enough if you haven't lost any Ice Pikmin in the previous 2 areas, but if you don't, not to worry, as you can build a clay bridge over to him instead. There's nothing making you do this first, of course, and you can instead proceed forward into the massive amount of water on the map, or more likely, climb the main aesthetic feature of the Serene Shores, a giant freaking sandcastle. Climbing up to the base on top of the castle, you'll encounter some armored cannon beetle larvae, who I'm telling you, get buffed in every subsequent game. Something about the hitbox of their boulders in Pikmin 4 is really unforgiving, and you'll lose Pikmin you feel like you shouldn't have in a lot of situations here. At the very top of the castle, guarding the Sandkeep base is the player's first encounter with the Crusted Rumpup, a new mini-boss who I rather like.
He's straightforward, charging at Pikmin to eat them, and comes packing the new mechanic just like the Foolix of being able to be toppled, unable to be damaged before that. Because these guys have a decent amount of health, be careful when he inevitably shakes your Pikmin off, as he turns on a dime and can catch you off guard rather easily, especially as you try to maneuver around his backside. I wish the Rumpup was used in more places throughout the game, as it's only seen twice overall, and I think it's a pretty underutilized enemy for being such a good one. After you defeat it, you can travel behind the castle to the below-grade discotheque, or build a climbing wall to find the second blue onion in the game, buried in a small pool, making it inaccessible to Oatchi, and requiring the player to have enough blue Pikmin to retrieve it. It's one of the ways the Serene Shores encourages you to keep exploring further to see if you can find any more wild blues in the caves. Descending the Sandkeep, the player will quickly find the Seafloor Resort, housing a number of wild blues for this exact purpose. The Serene Shores has an entirely new mechanic of having two different layouts, one filled with water during high tide before noon, and one with substantially less water during low tide in the afternoon. Oatchi will most likely have the ability to swim now, but the area can't fully be combed over until you have a solid amount of blue Pikmin, or you wait for the afternoon, when the water drains from the center of the map. At the center of the map, buried under some sand, is the third base, the Water's Edge, which I find to be where I keep the SS Beagle during 90% of my time in the Serene Shores. Since this base is located very centrally, you can freely explore whichever part of the shore you want. Focusing on the east side of the shores for a second, there are some dirt walls and a family of aristocrats, one of the most common enemies you'll find here alongside water dumbles. Tugging the potted plant will allow you to loop back to the Blossoming Dunes base, but honestly, there's not too much to see over here until you get through the passage cave of the area. To the west is a large body of water, with a few branching pathways that require you to smartly use both blue and ice Pikmin in order to collect everything. The new Pricklepuff enemy is actually surprisingly dangerous, as they can also turn on a dime and eliminate a large chunk of your Pikmin at once with their face spike attack. The puckering Blinos also make their return, with a total of 19 of them scattered around this large pool of water. One of my absolute favorite parts of the Serene Shores is how seamlessly the captain can jump off Oatchi's back with their blue Pikmin and explore the bottom of the pool, while Oatchi follows around up top. When your captain dives into the water, all the sound cuts out to a different form of muted underwater ambiance. This really blew me away when I first played through the game, and it's just so incredibly immersive. Using your blues to fight through swaths of underwater enemies while Oatchi just takes a bath above you is really funny, and heightens the overall charm of the game. The Pearly Clam Clamps make their return from Pikmin 1, although they function a bit differently in this entry. Previously, even when you removed whatever was inside their little pearl holding spot, they'd still be alive and kicking, ready to eat any Pikmin tossed inside still. In Pikmin 4, the Pearly Clam Clamps will actually die once their treasure's removed, making their bodies collectible for the first time. One of these Pearly Clam Clamps is located deep in the largest body of water, and contains another Flarlick, which is a funny surprise when you find out that this is even possible. There is a number of large treasures that can be found in the Serene Shores, notably the giant Moai statue, the Noodleite shell, a whole Statue of Liberty figurine, yeah, there you go, take that shit down, our country's in shambles, and an entire watermelon, which even when you break the hydro jellies guarding it, you'll find weighs a whopping 100 units, so you'll most likely be unable to carry it yet. The Serene Shores has a ton of personality, and the changing tide mechanic is yet another way the developers show us just how alive the Pikmin world actually is. It's hilarious to see these traditionally aquatic enemies just flop around on the sand once the water's been drained, but this also makes them easier to deal with because you can just use your whole squad. There's a lot more to the Serene Shores than just what exists on the surface. The sheer variety in these caves compared to the previous two areas is incredibly refreshing, and each one has its place in the area. The first cave you may encounter if you choose to explore the Sandkeep first is the Seafloor Resort, which as I mentioned is where you'll find a number of wild blue Pikmin. This is the first instance of the Jelly Float enemy returning from Pikmin 2, and I gotta say, they look pretty sleek. Maybe not as out there as the original design, but I still rather like it. The main problem with the Jelly Floats in Pikmin 4 is that if you decide to use Ice Pikmin to deal with them, they're literally no more dangerous than your average female Sheargrut. The entirety of the Seafloor Resort takes place in a touch tank, which is both super strange and also really charming. If you look at the skybox, it almost seems like you're inside some type of underground museum, complete with roped off sections and fluorescent lights. The first floor of the resort contains 10 wild blues and 5 wild ice Pikmin, as well as the second Flarlick of the Serene Shores found in a hydro jelly. There's a pretty simple sprinkler puzzle and also a pair of fiery blowhogs, proving that it's not always best to take in the recommended types. The second sublevel introduces another type of jelly float, the Greater Spotted, who holds the first castaway of the cave. There are also some more fiery blowhogs and fiery dweevils, proving once again that red Pikmin could serve you well here. Another 5 wild ice Pikmin are found here just for good measure, to make sure you can deal with the icy hazards that are the most prevalent on this sublevel. There's a couple of plastic squid toys on the ledge at the edge of the touch pool, and if you're not paying attention, it can be easy to miss them for 100% completion. The third floor is kinda more of the same, but has a greater focus on the underwater gameplay with some prickle puffs, some more wild blue Pikmin sprouts hidden in the grass, and a large collection of treasure. There's a peckish aristocrab and its child guarding a set of chattering teeth, and it's funny how it hides from you in the grass at first until you start approaching, or murder its child. The final floor has the first appearance of the Master Hop, a larger variant of the yellow Wally-Hop who serves as the boss of the cave. Like every encounter with an enemy, without Ice Pikmin, it can be easy to lose some of your squad if you're not careful. I rather like the quickness of the Master Hop, and even though its design is practically identical to the smaller variant, its AI is substantially better. There is, of course, another castaway who somehow got himself trapped in the sand under the water, as well as 15 wild blue Pikmin and 2 blue candy pop buds, making for a total of 35 wild Pikmin found here overall. This will definitely shore up your blue numbers, helping in your exploration of the Serene Shores once you leave. The Seafloor Resort is an extremely memorable cave, as it's very aesthetically pleasing and doesn't borrow anything from the Pikmin 2 caves that came before it. There's a nice variety of enemies, and the combination of blue and ice Pikmin is potent when it comes to solving how to get all the treasures most effectively. I'm somebody who would get thirsty watching the fruit juicing cutscenes from Pikmin 3, so when I first saw that there was straight up nigiri included as a collectible treasure, you already know I DoorDashed some sushi for myself to get in on the action. The next cave of the Serene Shores is the Sub-Zero Sauna, which recommends the same mix of blue Pikmin and ice Pikmin. The first floor of the cave debuts the new ice variant of the Wally-Hop, and its name is the Chili Hop? Oh, that's just perfect. These Chili Hops can be fairly dangerous, as if you're attacking with reds or blues, they can instantly freeze them and then proceed to squish them. This sublevel is where we'll discover white Pikmin for the first time, and they can deal with the limited amount of poison hazards that are scattered throughout the cave. The first floor is a pretty plain loop with a bunch of ice hazards, but floor 2 is where things are cranked up a notch. This is the first appearance of the cold air mechanic, which will temporarily immobilize non-ice Pikmin unless they're snuggled up on Oatchi's butt. This cold air can be eliminated by targeting ice blocks, which can, of course, only be done with ice Pikmin. This new mechanic is actually really interesting, as once all the ice blocks are broken, the cold air will dissipate and the ice on the level will turn into traversable water, freeing the treasure and castaway trapped underneath. There's another ivory candy pop bud found on this level, rounding out your number of newly acquired white Pikmin to 10, and a pair of Arctic cannon beetle larvae, who will prepare you for the final boss of the cave on sublevel 3. The Arctic cannon beetle looks amazing, but in practice, it's far from dangerous. You really have to be uncaring to allow your Pikmin to sit in front of its face long enough to have them even sucked up. And even if they are sucked up, only half of them end up eaten. The other half will be spit out in a giant snowball. Once this snowball hits the wall, a bunch of stalactites will end up dropping from the ceiling, getting in the way of both you and your Pikmin squad. These can crush Pikmin, but since they drop very slowly, you really should never be getting hit by one. The beetle should go down with relative ease, and you'll rescue the second castaway as well as collect a miniature replica of the Thinker statue. The Sub-Zero Sauna is a strange name for this one, as it makes you think of the classic hot and cold mix Nintendo loves so much, but really this is just an ice Pikmin cave through and through. A haze of smoke and music and dancing Pikmin. It's like being back in the discotheques of my youth. Olimar. Incredible. The below grade discotheque is a 5 sublevel cave which recommends red and yellow Pikmin. By this point in the game, you should have plenty of reds and yellows, so the extra wild Pikmin that join you are nice, but mostly unnecessary. The first floor is real simple. Some Pikmin 2 generation, family of tusked blowhogs, and a buildable clay mound. The second sublevel is really where things start to get more memorable, with a really long electric gate, a couple of bearded amp rats, and some fire hazards to spruce things up. The third sublevel is one of the most nonsensical, least fun to play sublevels of the entire game. This is a mushroom, fan, and conveyor belt puzzle all rolled into one, and your main task is to get 10 Pikmin over to this box to push it over and allow you access to the treasure. It's really as simple as changing the direction of one of the walkways as your Pikmin ride the first conveyor belt, but it's so visually confusing that you might be tempted to just start throwing your Pikmin at mushrooms and see what works. There's a rail here, which you and your Pikmin can Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 on, and the first appearance of a pink candy pop bud, giving you access to winged Pikmin for the first time. Unlike the other introductory sublevels for a Pikmin type, there's nothing exceptional for the wings to do in this cave, so their introduction kinda falls flat. The fourth sublevel is very memorable, as you're forced to use a sprinkler to put out a sizzling floor in order to get to one of the treasures. It's kinda silly that neither red Pikmin or winged Pikmin are able to move this treasure before the sizzling floor is put out,
as clearly reds can withstand it and wings can fly over it, but I digress. I've made the mistake more than once of setting some reds on this treasure, and then later on I'll absentmindedly run the sprinkler, which can cause some of those reds to drown and die. There's another pink candy pop out on this sublevel, but just like the last sublevel, there's really nothing spectacular for the wings to do here. Just based on the name of the cave, you probably already know who's waiting for you on the final sublevel. Groovy long legs, baby. This thing is freaking awesome. You land in the floor and can see it slowly spinning as it hangs from a web on the ceiling. The distortion it creates in this state kind of sounds like muffled radio chatter, and once you attack it, all hell will break loose. If you're not careful, the groovy long legs will gas your Pikmin, entrancing them below its body and preventing them from being whistled. Then, it'll start stomping to the beat it's creating from its own body. Its huge feet and kind of wonky step pattern make this easily the most dangerous variant of the long legs, as you can't stay under its body for too long, or all your Pikmin will be entranced. Groovy long legs has several different phases, with its blue phase being the slowest, its yellow being a middle ground, and the red phase kicking it into overdrive, stomping incredibly fast. Each phase has its own tempo of music and fun details that adapt to whatever's going on. The boss can lunge forward at you, which will give you another opportunity to attack it before it continues its ground shaking routine. I have only 2 complaints about this fight. The first of which is that once your Pikmin are gassed, the game immediately pauses the fight to show you the cutscene of them freaking out, interrupting the bass drop and taking away from the incredible impact it has. The second complaint I have is that this is the only time you'll see Groovy in the entire game, as he somehow misses out on being added to the final cave of the game. Despite being featured in the initial trailer for Pikmin 4, the Groovy encounter is still a massive surprise and just another awesome example of the incredible amount of detail that was sunk into the game. Finally, the last cave in the Serene Shores is the submerged castle. I mean the engulfed castle. yeah, definitely not the same thing. You already know some terminally online Nintendo dev recognized all the praise that the submerged castle gets from the community and probably thought, hey, we should just do that again for Pikmin 4. And that's exactly what they did. Veteran Pikmin players will see the rollers on the preview screen and the fact that you can only bring in blue Pikmin and immediately know what they're in for. The engulfed castle is basically just the submerged castle from Pikmin 2, but with a fresh coat of paint. If you've unlocked and completed some night missions already, you can add glow Pikmin to your squad for some hazard help, but having some elemental resistances on Oatchi also goes a long way. The first floor adds some pyroclasmic slooches into the mix and features the return of the fiery Bulblacks. Are they just looking at him like that? If you play smart, you can take down the Bulblacks with your blue Pikmin by leading him into the water, or if you've purchased enough bombs, you can just blow him into smithereens. Of course, it wouldn't be a clone of the submerged castle without the Water Wraith, who, just like Pikmin 2, will drop from the sky after 5 minutes on any given sublevel. Unfortunately, just because the Wraith is back, doesn't mean he inspires the same type of terror he used to. Because of the increase of Pikmin's speed, their tendency to rubber band to the captain, as well as the ability to be corralled on Oatchi's back, the Wraith doesn't pose as much of a threat as he used to. On top of this, the level generation has been altered to include grass patches surrounded by metal gates, preventing the Wraith from getting to the player if they're in these sections. In Pikmin 2, the Wraith can threaten to squish Pikmin who are waiting at the Hocotate ship, but since certain bases the SS Beagle can park at in the engulfed castle are in these grassy safe zones, the Wraith straight up can't get to any idle Pikmin there. Combine this with the generally snappier gameplay of Pikmin 4, and you might not even encounter the Wraith if you're quick enough. The second sublevel is where we find out that the Bulbmen have been completely replaced. And it feels like a kick in the balls to veteran players. Like, why do they have to go out of their way to replace them with a Bulborb and albino dwarf Bulborbs? This level's spiced up by having a really satisfying camera angle when traveling through this pipe, and the Pearly Clam Clamp chewing on a castaway once you emerge. In addition, the player can now access the elevated open pipe, where the fiery Dweevils are, by using this doggy door with Oatchi. This is required to lower the iron fence that's blocking the Pikmin from carrying the castaway, and I rather like this added new step of progression. The third sublevel is an electric-themed sublevel, and probably the least memorable out of all of them. There's an iron fence puzzle in a second base location guarded by a withering blowhog, but strangely, they chose not to include the Anode Beetles here, and instead replaced them with a Joustmite and another gray Wallyhop. Because of the second base location, this one goes by in a flash, although if the Wraith does spawn, he can indeed traverse the base locations on the sublevel, making him slightly more dangerous. The fourth sublevel might be the most memorable, as it's your first encounter with the new Startle Spore enemy. Without white Pikmin, and if you're choosing to clear this fast before the Wraith spawns, as you should be, you might be startled when this thing goes to town on your blue Pikmin. What the hell? On top of this, we see the new iteration of the volatile Dweeble here, which gave me a good laugh, and unlike the original, it won't just drop them on your head randomly. Across the board, Pikmin 4's caves rarely drop anything that dangerous onto the player, and never drop any bomb rocks, making them in general feel less trolly than the Pikmin 2 caves before them. This is also the first appearance of the moldy variant of the Dwarf Bulborb, and these are easily the most dangerous of all the Dwarf Bulborbs. If you try to traditionally hit them on their back, they'll erupt with spores, causing non-white Pikmin to scatter while they're poisoned. This can cause enough distraction for them to pick off one or two of your squad, so your best bet's just to use Oatchi to deal with them. Finally, once you reach the last sublevel, you'll gain access to purple Pikmin, which are used to flatten this bag and shock the Wraith back into existence with their impact damage. The fight with the Wraith plays out exactly as it does in Pikmin 2, and after the Wraith is put in its place, you grab a copy of Wave Race Blue Storm for the GameCube and head back to the surface with your newly acquired purple Pikmin. Overall, the Engulfed Castle is a pretty sweet trip down memory lane, and offers new players the same type of terror that was originally inspired back in Pikmin 2. It's definitely less difficult than the Submerged Castle before it though. One small detail here is that if you're under 50 blues entering any given sublevel, 10 wild blue sprouts will spawn to help you shore up your numbers. In addition, if you book it to the final floor and defeat the Wraith first, you can freely explore the first 4 sublevels after, without the threat of the Wraith on your back. Having all these options available to the player highlights how Pikmin 4 is just generally more forgiving than Pikmin 2, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. After beating the Engulfed Castle, you'll emerge in an elevated section of the overworld with some hidden treasure and one of 2 Dandori challenges, the other being located by the large pool of water with the Flarlick munching Clam Clamp. The Serene Shores is easily one of the best areas in Pikmin 4, and I'm sure is a standout for a lot of people. The shifting tide, the muted underwater gameplay, some of the best and most detailed caves in the game, as well as a number of memorable bosses come together to make the Serene Shores feel so exceptional when stacked up against the previous 2 areas. Not to mention the music. I mean, just running around with Oatchi is fun by itself, outside of everything there is to do and discover. Definitely my second favorite area of the game, but I wouldn't be shocked if the overall sentiment of the community is that it's the best one, 'cause it is really that good. The Hero's Hideaway is probably the most aesthetically ambitious of the new set of areas, as it's just literally set in somebody's home. The modern 2-story house comes with a beautiful gated terrace garden, and is just a short stroll away from a small private beach. There's a nearby playground and a cherry blossom grove adjacent to the property, so it's the perfect location if you have a family full of youngins. It's kind of a mystery why the owner of such an excellent property like this would abandon it, as not only finding, but successfully winning a bid on a house like this in the current housing market just doesn't happen anymore. And that's sort of the uncanny part of the Hero's Hideaway, is that the area is abandoned, but it feels like it shouldn't be. The Hero's Hideaway isn't decrepit or unkempt as you might expect. The lights are on, the stove is firing, and outside of the origami bird hanging from the spiderweb in the lamp, and the few mounds of dirt where the player can build structures, the place is surprisingly clean. Before we dive into the player's exploration in the Hideaway, I think that it's important to talk about how important it is that this area exists in the first place. I mean, sure, we've always known that the Pikmin were inhabiting an alternate version of Earth, where humans were just no longer around. But the case can be made that it was some type of post-apocalyptic scenario based on all the relics left behind and the general lack of anything that too closely resembled humanity. The closest Pikmin's ever come to this was in the mission mode level in Pikmin 3, the Fortress of Festivity, but that was DLC and didn't show us much of anything beyond the confines of the base of a Christmas tree. The Hero's Hideaway is clearly lived in, and the almost pristine nature of the map creates this really unsettling feeling. It's beyond cool to be able to climb up to the countertops or shelves and just be able to take a full look around at the place. But when you start to dig a little deeper, it becomes really strange. Let's piece together who actually lives or lived here, as there are a number of context clues that can give us a surprisingly clear picture. We know a few details about the person or persons in question, based on some of the treasure and other items we find lying around the Hideaway. I'm inclined to believe that the owner of the house is most likely male, given we find the presence of an engagement ring on one of the shelves, either ready to be given or forcibly given back to him.
Oh, she rejected him. She just ran away, I don't know.
He's definitely a pet owner, having a photo of 2 dogs displayed on his desk in the living room. He might be a writer, given the presence of multitude of copies of the complete works of world literatures, or potentially a teacher who's hanging on to some extra textbooks for his class. One of the strangest details is the presence of luggage close to what is presumably the front door. It's almost like they were either planning on leaving but didn't get the chance, or the more likely scenario is that the house was very recently moved into. Between Olimar's shipwreck tale and the Rescue Corps' visit to the Hideaway, more decorations and detail are added to the map, maybe signaling that he's gotten further into his unpacking process. I know when I move into a new spot, miscellaneous things can just kind of get scattered everywhere while I put the more important items and fixtures in place. There are pieces of a toy robot lying around, and the presence of a copy of Kurukurukururin. I can't even fucking say that. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. Kurukurukururin. A 2001 Game Boy game only released in Japan, Europe, and Australia. Now, either this guy's an avid video game collector, or he's native to one of these regions. Now let's talk about the drawings that are scattered around the entirety of the Hideaway. It stands to reason that an adult man who owns a home, 2 dogs, and is preparing to propose to his partner wouldn't be the culprit behind these crudely drawn pictures. I think it's much more likely that these were done by a child or children. And let's be honest, it's pretty shoddy work. These are mostly pictures of train tracks and trains, cars and roads, as well as planes, clearly showing a general interest in transportation. By the couch, there are 2 more detailed pictures, one of which showing an abstract depiction of this house and the adjacent garden. At first, I thought this could be a picture of their old house maybe, until I cross-referenced and discovered that the roof of the hero's hideaway is indeed blue, as shown if you look at it from the Sun-Speckled Terrace. There's also a picture of the sand keep from the Serene Shores, so perhaps it was this child or children who built the sandcastle in the first place. There are grinding rails and other wooden block structures that seem to have been set up for entertainment purposes. Perhaps the slope up to the coffee table and weird square structure are meant to be places for the children to drive this toy car found by the foot of the stairs base. Sure, this toy car is also made of wooden blocks and would fall apart instantly the second a child tries to move it, but imagination is a powerful thing. It seems this family was on the verge of starting a new life together, so their general absence over the course of however many days you spend exploring the area is incredibly striking. The feeling of something being off kind of persists throughout the hero's hideaway, as their house is just infested with critters. There are rats, fleas, spiders, and even some lizards who colonize this family's home. Another sort of plausible theory is that this house is somewhat of a vacation home, but who'd leave an engagement ring just lounging around in their vacation home? All this to say, I'm definitely reading too much into this. I'm not a Pikmin theorist by trade necessarily, but I just wanted to flex those muscles real quick before we really start breaking down the gameplay of the area. Just like Olimar before you, you'll blast through the open window and land on the Stargazer's spot. This base only really exists to give you a nice open view of the home, as outside of being close to 1 or 2 treasures, it really feels entirely disconnected from the rest of the area. Once you choose to make the jump off the ledge, which, like, of course you would, why would you wait for the Pikmin to dig this stupid tunnel, you'll be greeted by one of the main gimmicks of the hero's hideaway. Olimar's companion Moss has had enough of the Rescue Corps' meddling, and she'll wander around the map trying to whistle your Pikmin from you. Moss isn't a direct threat to the Pikmin herself, as she can't kill them in any way, but that doesn't stop her from potentially leading your army directly through the enemies scattered around the house who can harm your Pikmin. If brought under her control, Moss will run away and toss Pikmin out of this fan leading up to the vault, rendering them unable to move or be called by the idler's alert. The only way to rouse your Pikmin is by manually whistling them from up on the table or by calling them with the homesick signal. Even on paper, this is a pretty mild threat, and in practice, it's even less of a problem than it sounds. Even if Moss approaches you, with a decent squad of Pikmin, you'll be able to KO her before they can even be brought to the vault. I had to go out of my way to let Moss take my Pikmin so I could get some of this footage, and even then, that was difficult to do without the Pikmin in my squad trying to feint her. She won't be able to take all your Pikmin at once, even if it looks like she'll be able to, and within 10 to 20 seconds, the rest of your Pikmin will be able to feint her, so you'll get them back anyway. Moss is the only enemy in Pikmin 4 with a revival mechanic similar to the Bull Bears and Gatling Groinks from Pikmin 2, but is a much smaller threat overall. Plus, her regeneration's rather slow. It's best to just deal with Moss at the beginning of the day, or just maneuver around her during the day and go about your business. Once you take care of her, there are really only 2 directions you can go from the Stargazer's spot, toward the foot of the stairs or to the feasting center base located next to the island in the kitchen. There's not much stopping you from progressing in the area, as there's a lack of any type of breakable wall, no true environmental hazard, and only a single body of water, if you can even call it that. The hero's hideaway really banks on the novelty of being inside a person's home without thinking too heavily about the actual structure or progression of the level. You can basically gun it to every corner of the map with no trouble whatsoever. The only way to make forward progress in the hideaway is to hit the buttons on the coffee table, kitchen island, and kitchen counter. This will turn on and off various fans that can propel you to different parts of the map. The only real stopgap for progress in the Hero's Hideaway is the Frozen Inferno cave that'll block your access to the Ice Pikmin onion that the Hideaway taunts you with right off the rip. Given how useful Ice Pikmin are in the game, most players will want to prioritize retrieving this onion first, even over actually finding and rescuing Olimar, which is your primary goal in the area. But let's chat about the vault for a second before we really dive into the caves that you can find here. The vault to the final Dandori battle with Olimar requires a 3-digit code to be unlocked. This code correlates to the symbol and number on 3 different playing cards that are found as treasure scattered throughout the Hero's Hideaway. The Wisdom Emblem is the first card found pinned to a bulletin board right by the Stargazer's spot. The Power Emblem is located on the 3rd step of the staircase by the 2nd base, and the Courage Emblem is on the 2nd step of the stepladder over by the fridge. You might be thinking to yourself, ooh, cool Zelda reference, but that's not even the only one in this area. The Mechanical Harp, Windmills, is a music box found here that also plays the Song of Storms. Really neat stuff. Anyways, these cards generate randomly per file, so there's no set code for casuals and speedrunners alike to memorize. You'd think Nintendo would make it so you have to find all these cards before you can open the vault, but they actually allow you to crack the safe without collecting any cards, which I only know because I did so for this analysis. This file generated with 328 as the code, but I'm sure I could have burned through all 720 combinations in a single day. Once the vault is open, you begin your Leafy showdown with Olimar. This is technically the only Dandori battle in the game that you'll have to complete yourself, as Dingo can deal with the others if you choose to lose on purpose. The theme for this specific Dandori battle irrationally pisses me off, but once you've taken care of business and carry Olimar to the ship, the game will finally enter the postgame. Before we explore this further, let's chat about the caves the Hideaway holds. As I mentioned, the Frozen Inferno is required to get through in order to acquire the Ice Pikmin onion. Well, technically, you can run off the kitchen island and throw a few yellow Pikmin at a time, yet another way Nintendo kinda lets you get creative in solving some of the problems posed by the Hideaway. The entrance to the Frozen Inferno is located on top of a lit stovetop burner, preventing any Pikmin other than red Pikmin from entering. This is the second and final cave of the game that hits you with a single Pikmin type limitation, the other of course being the engulfed castle. You also need to have purchased the fire resistant upgrade for both the Captain and Oatchi, so you know this cave is serious. This is also just another way that Pikmin 4 kinda shorts yellows too. Where's my yellow only cave, Nintendo? Upon entering the Frozen Inferno, you'll find the new fire starter mechanic for the first time, along with a few fiery enemies and some sizzling floors. Finally, you can go to town on a fiery Bulblax without worrying about it suddenly bursting back into flames. I've already expressed my love for the new fire starter mechanic, and this sublevel is basically just to teach you about what it can do. Sublevel 2 is one of the most memorable sublevels in the game for me, because it's really when I started to appreciate everything Pikmin 4 had brought to the table.
This is Pikmin 4! Look at it! Take it in! These are ice Pikmin moving little clay pellets inside of a cave, where there's terrain environment and I'm riding a dog with a custom captain. Pikmin 4, everybody. This is a frosty Wollywog. These are fire-specific hazards, and this functions like bomb rocks? Are you serious? Is this game perfect or what?
This is one of the more difficult floors the game has to offer. With the plethora of icy enemies, it can be tough to take them down if Oatchi doesn't have ice resistance. This sublevel was one of my favorites of the game. So many cool concepts just come together to make something truly special. Sublevel 3 is another very memorable one. This features the ice blocks that emanate cold air, some Arctic cannon beetle larvae, and also the new freeze cake enemy. Only 5 more ice Pikmin are given to you here, so it's another one with scarce resources and a generally higher difficulty. The Snowflake Fluttertail awaits you at the end of the Frozen Inferno, and honestly, it's got a pretty cool design, but it isn't too big of a threat if you're careful. You have to use the fire starters to destroy its cloak of snow before you can damage it, making reds essential for this boss. I'd have liked to see this boss in the Cavern for a Keyng, maybe backed up by some other enemies or grouped together with another one of its kind, because I don't think this battle alone really shows its true danger. Great cave, definitely one of the most memorable in the entire game. The Doppelganger's den's found on top of the TV stand, and in all honesty, it feels kinda unfocused compared to the other 2 caves in the Hideaway. The recommended Pikmin types are blue, ice, and white Pikmin, so you know there's going to be some ice and water puzzles, but we've seen more detailed and well thought out caves already, so this one isn't exactly anything to write home about. The most notable part about Sublevel 1 is that it features 2 fruit treasures and a juicer, so I guess there's a story being told here. Sublevel 2 introduces these different color gates that can be switched from closed to open by hitting the corresponding button. There's a lot of gold nuggets on this sublevel, so it can feel rewarding to create the shortest possible path for your Pikmin by using both the gates and the ice Pikmin. Sublevel 3 is pretty different from the first 2, as it switches from the bath aesthetic to the metal pipe aesthetic. There's a neat section with an armored cannon beetle larva guarding a second base, a moving walkway puzzle, and some poison mushrooms, but all in all, it feels distinctly different from the first two sublevels. It's strange to me that the colored gate gimmick on sublevel 2 doesn't appear either here or on the first floor, and while no sublevel is outright bad, they just kind of feel random. Sublevel 3 doesn't even have the Gilmandwy like the first two sublevels did, cementing it as just kind of feeling disconnected. The boss of the Doppelganger's Den is the new Guildmander enemy, and I actually rather like how this fight progresses. When its back is attacked, it'll throw off the pieces of its armor, which distract nearby Pikmin into breaking them. The Guildmander has no limit to the amount of Pikmin it's able to eat, making it an absurdly dangerous enemy if you're not careful. Like the antenna beetle before it, rest in peace, the Guildmander also disrupts the treasure gauge, but this isn't a problem, especially given the fact it's the only enemy found on the final floor. I think the Guildmander fight is one of the better ones in Pikmin 4, and like the Fluttertail before it, probably only reaches its true potential under a different, more difficult set of circumstances. The Doppelganger's Den's a fine cave, but really misses the mark when it comes to theming. I honestly don't think there are enough Guildmandwys scattered throughout the levels, and given the number of Doppelganger-style enemies that exist in Pikmin 4, like the Sun Squish and Creeping Chrysanthemum, you'd think that more of them would be featured here. It's a good thing the last cave of the Hero's Hideaway does a much better job at maintaining a unique identity. The Plunder Palace is where we see the return of a fan favorite. And honestly, okay, bread bugs are cuter than ever. I gotta give it up for the Bread Bug Legion, because they took home a huge W with Pikmin 4. The bread bugs in Pikmin 4 work differently from their counterparts in Pikmin 2, as instead of having a specific home nest, there are predetermined dirt piles that the bread bug will drag enemy corpses and treasure to instead. The bread bugs will also compete with Pikmin that are currently carrying a treasure or corpse, while previously they used to ignore treasures that were already being moved. On top of this, bread bugs can no longer kill Pikmin, as those who are competing with it for a treasure will just be left idle. The bread bug can attempt to shake the Pikmin off of the treasure it's competing for too, which is cute, but barely effective. Sublevel 1 features these bread bugs and a few bearded amprats. There are a number of small treasures here, and I think this is so you can comfortably familiarize yourself with the bread bugs and their work using a smaller number of Pikmin. Now, if I'm being honest, outside of the new animations given to bread bugs, their AI is totally shot in Pikmin 4. Once a bread bug has run out of dirt patches and bushes to place its stolen loot, it'll just kind of drag whatever else it can find aimlessly around the level. With the old nests, a bread bug could effectively clean a whole sublevel if it wanted to, provided the items were light enough. But with this new system, it feels like after a minute or so, the bread bugs become entirely pointless. You don't even need to defeat them in order to recover the stolen goods, so they're effectively just moving stuff around the map, not even gatekeeping you from it. I think thematically, this new behavior's fine, but makes the bread bug significantly less interesting as a gameplay element. Sublevel 2 ditches the bread bugs almost immediately, and is a very Rock Pikmin focused level. You'll find some Scutterchucks, 2 crystal walls, and a Whip-Tongue Bulborb, along with 10 wild Rock Pikmin. Sublevel 3 features a Porquillin, who's positioned on a ledge that the player can't jump up to. This makes it both unable to be rushed, and forces you to throw your Pikmin right up to it. This is kinda reminiscent of a Tower Groink from Pikmin 2, but the Porquillin isn't very dangerous even in these conditions, as your Rock Pikmin can make really quick work of it. Or you can just wait for it to be done firing and throw your purples at it. Sublevel 4 has 3 more bread bugs, some Joust Mites, and some Wattlecloths, and a very interesting layout. One of the Wattlecloths is located on a keyboard out of your reach, so you have to solve a fan puzzle in order to get to it. Finally, Sublevel 5 features 2 giant bread bugs, a bull bear, and a puffy blowhog, along with an absolute abundance of treasure. This is definitely the most memorable sublevel from this cave to me, and you end up spending a decent amount of time here to make sure you get everything. I like how the blocks are built in such a way that it forms these corridors. The fact that both the bull bear and giant bread bug wander the area means you never know who you'll see behind these corridors, so you can be jump scared if you're not careful. The giant bread bug's AI is really no better than the regular bread bugs, as without a place to drag treasure, they'll just meander with whatever they're carrying until they're dealt with. I'm pretty sure this puzzling behavior was all implemented solely for this gag of this castaway being dragged endlessly in circles. The giant bread bugs now take damage from 10 Pikmin being thrown on top of it, or 1 purple, and will angrily charge at the player after taking the damage. Giant bread bugs, like their younger selves, cannot kill Pikmin, so they're basically just a light nuisance on this sublevel. Sublevel 5 also contains the underground Flarlick in the Hero's Hideaway, and if you already retrieved the one that's guarded by a Porquillin on the Kitchen's Island, then you'll hit the max Pikmin limit of 100. This is the first cave with this toy box theme, and fits perfectly nestled into the hero's hideaway. Pretty much every sublevel is memorable, and the return of the fan favorite breadbugs no doubt will place this cave among many people's favorites. I'm personally less enthused about how the breadbugs work now, but hey, I guess something's better than nothing, right? The hero's hideaway is a smaller area, despite its wide open layout making it feel larger than it actually is. There are only 3 caves and 1 Dandori challenge, and with a lack of serious obstacles to progression, it can go by much quicker than the other areas do. That's not necessarily a bad thing though, but I feel like the setting isn't really used to its fullest. It's cool that you have to drain the sink to access the treasures without blue Pikmin, and building up to the TV stand is neat, but it would have been nice to have some Pikmin-specific obstacles like elemental gates or hazards. The novelty of traversing a human's home kind of wears off after the first time you experience it, as there's a lot of wide open spaces and it's not exactly interesting to progress through. Plus, it kind of just exists to ask the question, just how intertwined are the human world and the world of the Pikmin? The lackluster gimmicks of the hideaway kind of fall flat on repeat playthroughs as well, as moss isn't a threat basically at all, and collecting the cards for the vault is not only unnecessary, but considering 1 card's immediately available to you upon landing, you could just guess and check the safe without actually having to do anything major in the level. I don't know. I guess the area interests me from a lore perspective, but I find that I'm pretty whelmed by the hideaway, and it certainly doesn't stand up to either the Serene Shores or the final 2 postgame areas. All of this to say, yeah, I can definitely see why someone would like the hero's hideaway, but it's not quite my cup of tea when it comes to Pikmin level design or aesthetic. I like when the human elements are hidden or blended within an area, but when the level becomes entirely human, it's up to the Pikmin elements to be added. And frankly, I don't think they went far enough with giving your Pikmin things to do here. The area recommends yellow, ice, and rock Pikmin. And do you want to know why? It's because there are bearded amp rats, icy enemies, and scutterchucks, not because they have anything else to do here. And when you take into account the fact that you can deal with these either with Oatchi's Rush or items, it really doesn't quite matter what Pikmin types you use. And in my eyes, that kind of shows a lack of a clear vision. Like, why recommend these 3 types and then have a red-only cave? This is kind of the poster child for Pikmin 4's areas, but I feel like it offers the least Pikmin experience out of all 6 areas, and has a general lack of coherency. Let me know how you feel about the Hero's Hideaway down below. It's probably my second least favorite area in the game, only beating out the Sun-Speckled Terrace, and only doing so because of 2 pretty standout caves, as well as the interesting vault gimmick. So, you saved Olimar. That should mean you've completed your objective and can leave the planet, right? Well, of course we know what happens next. Oatchi's infected and can't leave the planet, which is convenient because we've now been tasked by the Rescue Corps HQ with saving the rest of the castaways on the planet. It would have been easy enough for Pikmin 4 to end the campaign here, even though it may have felt pretty underwhelming. All things considered, between the first 4 areas of the game, you'll probably have racked up 20 or so hours playing casually. This is of course by far the longest amount of time spent in a Pikmin game's campaign, but Nintendo decided to go the extra mile, having an MCU-style mid-credit scene that shows the abandoned Moss meet up with the Pikmin universe's own Agent of Chaos. This reveal had me floored the first time I saw it, as I don't know why, but I didn't expect Louie to even be in the game in the first place. I mean, canonically, it doesn't make a ton of sense, but Pikmin 4 explains it away by saying that the president of Hocotate Freight actually sent Louie here to look for Olimar, but Louie forgot what he looks like. Okay. So once Louie meets Moss, he starts helping with her established goal of leafifying the castaways, presumably to protect them from the toxic environment of the planet. This is explained in some nighttime dialogue that basically says that Louie was imitating the behavior of the red leafling, who he recognizes as Olimar-like, but not as Olimar. He does this because Olimar had previously told him to copy what he does, but considering Louie doesn't even see this leafling as Olimar, it makes his behavior all the more puzzling. I guess it's just a way to establish Louie as the antagonistic force of the back end of the game, but it's pretty ridiculous when you realize that Louie could simply open his ears and listen to Olimar once he's been rescued, and have no need to do any of the things he does. This kind of paints Louie's character as some kind of dim-witted accomplice, which he is no doubt, but I feel like they sort of drag out this behavior to an unbelievable degree in general. In Pikmin 2, there's some nuance to why Louie decides to stay on the planet after the debt is repaid. The game leaves it mostly up to the player to determine why he'd do such a thing. I'd like to clarify to everyone watching too, that Olimar did not leave Louie on purpose, as that interpretation of events doesn't take into account how absolutely dad-coded Olimar is. Olimar has experienced the horrors of the Pikmin planet alone firsthand, and would absolutely not leave Louie to go through the same thing he did. So that must mean that either Louie didn't get on the ship in the first place, or he jumped out last second. Did he feel like nothing was there for him on Hocotate, and maybe felt more at home on the Pikmin planet? Was this because he found something with the Pikmin planet that he couldn't get from back home? Did the promise of delicious foreign space cuisine keep him there? Did he just not want to go back to work at Hocotate Freight, specifically? I mean, kids these days, they just don't want to work anymore. You're goddamn right, working sucks. There are a lot of ways that the player can end up reasoning with Louie's decision, and by the time that you find him at the end of the Dream Den, it's kind of left up in the air whether Louie was indeed allied with or controlling the Titan Dweevil, or if he was its prisoner. Louie's more complex than he has any right to be, and some interpretations of his character are actually really compelling. In Pikmin 3, his behavior can be understood, as even though he's a minor antagonist to the Copilot crew, from Louie's point of view, Olimar was taken, and he's now been kidnapped by a different faction, so it makes sense for him to lash out, escape, and take their juice. In Pikmin 4, they lean more heavily into the interpretation that Louie's just really dense, and his only real driving force is his desire to eat things. Outside of this, the man cannot be reasoned with. Generally, I'm okay with his portrayal in Pikmin 4, but I find it to be more annoying than compelling compared to Pikmin 2 or 3. Louie's behavior's kind of been all over the place, but for the sake of extending the game to another 2 areas, they kind of sacrifice a lot of what makes Louie generally redeemable. So that brings us up to speed with the campaign. I kind of felt like talking about Louie here rather than in the character section, as I think the way he shapes the postgame was generally prioritized by the developers over telling a coherent story with him. Upon returning to the planet, the next explorable area opens up to the player, and if they've wrapped up everything there is to do in the first 4, then there's nothing left to do but to land in the Giant's Hearth. Now guys, before I start voicing this section, I want to let you know, it's pronounced Hearth.
Hearth.
I've always thought it was pronounced Hearth. I'm going to struggle through this entire thing, but I just wanted to let you know that if I fuck up, I'm sorry. I love the Giant's Hearth. Is it a coincidence that the only area that doesn't recommend Ice Pikmin is my favorite area in the game? That's right. After playing through the game almost 6 times at this point, I've decided that the Giant's Hearth is my favorite area in Pikmin 4. I think it was like my 3rd playthrough or something that I just became obsessed with trying to optimize my first day here. I ended up spending a few hours just resetting day 1 in the area over and over again, and this is the only area that really gave me that type of drive. Now to explain why is a whole endeavor, so let's just get into the general aesthetic of the Hearth, as it's also one of the things I appreciate the most about it. The Giant's Hearth takes place at presumably a campground, as there's a brick barbecue pit at the center of the map that towers above everything else below it. Not only is this a major human feature of the area, but unlike the elephant slide and the bench in the Arcadia and Terrace respectively, you could traverse up to the top of this grill with some dog parkour. The map is mostly dirt and grassy hills, with some smaller ponds that are able to be drained, but it's accented by the fire pits that were previously found in the Frozen Inferno. The entirety of the Hearth is basically one of those fire starter puzzles, and keeping the flame alive can be a legitimate challenge for a player trying to light everything up as fast and efficiently as possible. Trying to keep the fire starter alive while also traversing water is really neat, and both blues and reds see some notable shine in this area. One of the biggest reasons that I like the Hearth is it feels like Pikmin 4 is finally taking the gloves off a little bit. The enemies here are far and away the most dangerous of any area, with a pair of Master Hops chilling in these sprinklers, a trio of bull bears patrolling different parts of the map, a Mama Sheer Grub underneath the wooden chair, who, let's be honest, is a big surprise as this is probably the first time you'll see it. There's a couple of bug-eyed crawmads and a sprinkler and some water, the fiery bullblacks guarding a second base next to another sprinkler puzzle, a bloomcap bloister lurking near the entrance to the cave, and of course the sovereign bullblacks guarding the rock onion at the far end of the map. If you couldn't tell, I like when Pikmin areas feature a variety of unique and dangerous enemies, and while areas like the Hideaway are more focused on gimmicks, the Hearth focuses on combat and genuine forward progression. God dang it, that wasn't on purpose. Lighting these fire pits feels like you're claiming territory back from the monsters that inhabit the area, and every single enemy feels rewarding to deal with, as this will be the first time you see a few of them. Upon landing at the Line of Logs base on the west side of the map, you could proceed north to the Double Bull Bear section, or go south to start working your way through some water, only to find your path blocked by the dried plants. Less experienced players might think that this is the game forcing them to go north, but with some tight timing, you can indeed carry the Firestarter here and progress through the map in this way, cutting through the sprinklers and double Master Hop to make your way to the second base, the Abandoned Throne. Unlike the Hideaway where everything feels open and no Pikmin type has any real opportunity to shine, the Hearth requires that you manage your Pikmin types effectively with its use of both fire and water hazards. The fire starters will fizzle if you try and bring them through these sprinkler sections, so you have to turn them off first with some buildable clay valves. In order to do this, you should deal with the plethora of large and dangerous enemies that the Hearth throws at you first. Keeping this fine balance of efficiency in combat and efficiency in puzzle solving really screams Pikmin to me, and since you don't, or rather aren't forced to use Ice Pikmin here, the game's combat is at its best here. In addition, these bases are discovered in a mostly linear order, showing that the developers had a clearer vision of what the player would tackle and in what order. This is as close as Pikmin has come to giving us a fire-themed area, and while I'm still holding out for a volcanic area with lava flows and a black sand beach, I think that the Hearth does a great job, complementing these fire elements with large water fixtures. I do wish there were some fire geysers scattered around to spruce up some of the larger open areas, but they aren't totally necessary. The Abandoned Throne base is easily the most central of the base locations, but unlike the misshapen pond in the Arcadia and the water's edge in the shores, this doesn't always feel like the most optimal place to keep your base, which I think is a good thing. There's a lot to chew through with the Giant's Hearth, and it's definitely a step up in difficulty from the first 4 areas of the game, so I might be slightly biased as a Pikmin veteran looking for a challenge, but it all comes together so cleanly, I have trouble not singing its praises. I haven't really touched on the music of the areas all too much, since I recently made a music tier list for almost every track in the Pikmin games. Go watch it. It's 4 hours long. You guys know how I work. It's just a part of who I am, I guess. I don't know. But the Hearth features this twang of a guitar and some whistling that sticks in your head very memorably. It also samples the Forest Navel, and that's my favorite area from Pikmin 1, so it already gets some points in my book. This rather laid-back track contrasts excellently with all the danger that the Hearth poses, and is exactly what the Pikmin series is all about. It's quaint and homey feeling, and I don't know, I just love it. Like the Hero's Hideaway, the Hearth only has 3 caves, one of which being a single floor, but there's also 3 different Dandori challenges scattered throughout the map, making it feel substantially more dense. The caves in the Hearth are probably its weakest aspect. Let's start with the Dream Home. I'll be honest, when I first played through Pikmin 4, I read the words Dream Home and expected something akin to the Dream Den. Dream what? A highly difficult gauntlet of endless swaths of enemies and hazards, but it's actually surprisingly tame. The Dream Home only has 1 floor, and features the same vault mechanic that the Hero's Hideaway does, except this time, of course, it's in a cave. Like the Hideaway, there are 3 different cards, the Love Emblem, the Money Emblem, and the Work Emblem, scattered throughout the floor that are needed to decipher the code for this vault. There's very few enemies in this cave, notably a Jumbo Bulborb and the first appearance of a Mammoth Snoot Whacker. The Jumbo Bulborb is one of the enemies in the game that can offer a consistent challenge to the player even with Oatchi, and the Mammoth Snoot Whacker, while substantially less dangerous, does intimidate the player in their effort to collect this last card. The Snoot Whackers require Oatchi to deal with them, and considering this mammoth-sized one takes 2 Mega Rushes to even go down, it can really drag out the amount of time you end up spending on this sublevel. There's also a violet Candy Pop Bud, as well as 2 pink Candy Pop Buds, making this a pretty reliable place to shore up your numbers for some of the rarer Pikmin types. All of your effort to open the vault reveals a perfectly preserved flan that was apparently placed there by Louie, who forgot the combination to the safe and just abandoned it. I don't know what I expected to be in the vault on my first playthrough, but a dessert was not on my list. For good measure, there's also a Flarlick here. The extra Flarlick that you find will turn into nectar and spicy spray upon being collected, instead of increasing your Pikmin limit past 100. This isn't Colossal Caverns, okay? There are still some rules that the game has to follow. I think the Dream Home offers an interesting and unique enough experience to warrant its existence, but it is kinda strange that it's in the Giant's Hearth and not the Hero's Hideaway. The Cradle of the Beast is the next cave, and while it's definitely more thematically appropriate for the Hearth, its length kinda confuses me. Only 3 floors for this cave? Most caves at this stage would have at least 4 sublevels, and especially given that this is the one that features the return of the Empress Bullblacks with her offspring, I'd have expected it to have at least 4, 5, or 6, I don't know, just more than 3. The first sublevel features the fire starters and the dried plants just like in the overworld. There's a fiery Bullblacks guarding the only lit fire pit, but if you're resourceful, you can just use the Bullblacks itself to burn these dried plants. You'll have to burn all the dried plants here if you want access to either of the purple candy pop buds here, and you will, because you're most likely going to want them for the next sublevel. Sublevel 2 has a focus on rock Pikmin, housing 10 wild rocks and a number of enemies that rock Pikmin do well against in combat. Easily, the most notable part of the sublevel is the poor Quillen, who will drop the King of Meats treasure. I'm not sure how this guy held such a massive ham in his stomach, but requires 300 Pikmin to lift. Even if you fully upgraded Oatchi, he can only carry 100 units of weight, meaning you need at least 12 purples and 80 non-purples to even be able to lift this thing. This is one of the only treasures in the game that outright requires purples to be used, so it's a good thing they gave you some on the previous floor. Finally, on the third and final sublevel of the cave is the boss battle with the Empress Bullblacks. This is another encounter that is mostly trivialized by having the Pikmin ride on Oatchi's back, and is an instance where you'll start to really see the problems with the auto-locking mechanic. Due to the larva's behavior and the sheer number of them, it can be quite difficult to lock your cursor onto the exact thing you want to throw at any given moment. However, without the babies, the Empress isn't really a substantial threat. Again, I'm happy they're back, but they don't exactly fit with the new combat system all too well. The last cave in the Giant's Hearth is the ultimate testing range, and at first I was like, oh yeah, here we go, probably due to the ultimate in its name. But this cave really doesn't do anything for me. It recommends both white and winged Pikmin, the weakest of the Pikmin types, and at this stage in the game, you probably don't have more than 30 or so of each type, so it's really up to you to go against the loadout and bring in a third type of your choice. I'll always recommend bringing in purples for this cave as well, as it helps drastically shorten the amount of time you have to watch your Pikmin wail away on any given enemy. The problem with the ultimate testing range is that it's actually really easy. The first sublevel has only 4 enemies, all of which are Venom Dweevils, a clay bridge, and a few floating platforms. The second sublevel doesn't fare much better, with an iron fence puzzle, some snoot whackers, a withering blowhog, and some watery blowhogs for some reason. The third has a number of arachnodes, with a castaway caught in one of their webs, as well as 2 wattlepus and 2 puffy blowhogs. This is really the only sublevel with anything of substance, as you can see a genuine effort by the developers to make winged Pikmin seem sorta useful. The fourth sublevel features the jelly floats, who are way more threatening if you don't have ice Pikmin, as well as a ton of moving walkways. Listen, I get it, okay? Winged Pikmin can fly over these, no problem. But it's easy enough to switch the walkways back and forth, and whites carry things so much faster. Like, I can't give it up for the wings here, I'm sorry. They're just so useless, and I hate their belly stripe. There, I said it, I have beef with the winged Pikmin. I'm glad they got shafted in Pikmin 4. Finally, as you may have expected, the last sublevel is home to the Man-at-Legs, who just looks so sleek in HD. There's some breakable walls here that you can use as cover, but if you stay behind them for too long, it will break through and be able to shoot right at you. The Man-at-Legs is one of the most heavily nerfed enemies in the game, as having your Pikmin ride Oatchi basically gets them out of any real danger. I love the new sound design that the Man-at-Legs has, and it's certainly an intimidating enemy based on sheer vibes, but its ability to be outright cheesed by Oatchi hurts it as a boss encounter overall. I remember feeling genuinely disappointed that this was all to the ultimate testing range on my first playthrough, and going back through the game a number of times really made me see how much the ultimate testing range paled in comparison to the other more developed caves in the game. I wish the Cradle of Beasts had 5 floors and this one only had 3, but I get the developers were trying to make winged Pikmin seem useful somewhere, even though they failed at accomplishing that. On top of this, white Pikmin are also pointless to bring, as there's not a lick of poison anywhere to be found. Both of the recommended types for the cave aren't required anywhere. You might as well bring in a squad of purples and reds so that you can at least get through it quickly. The ultimate testing range is only saved by the fact that the final treasure you get is a Wavebird GameCube controller bestowed with the name Winged Freedom Sculpture. I mean, that goes hard as fuck. The Wavebird exudes this early 2000s aura that I just can't help but foam at the mouth for. I'm sorry. Last thing to find in the Giant's Hearth is the hot sandy dual Dandori battle with Louie, found by draining the small pond at the far east side of the map. Before the battle, Louie tries to transform Yorkie into a leafling, but the transformation fails, later revealed to be because of the glow sap that Yorkie had been sustaining himself on at night, the natural cure to leafification. Louie's a Dandori genius compared to Leafling Olimar, as his AI is noticeably way better, and there's actually a decent chance of losing the battle if you're not careful. And that's about all for the Giant's Hearth. As an area to kick off the postgame of Pikmin 4, it does an excellent job at testing the player's puzzle-solving ability and combat skill. The vibes are super on point, and the level is hyper memorable due to all these large and in-charge enemies. It's my personal favorite area of the game by a long shot, and after playing through the game multiple times, this was only further cemented to me. Anyone else a Giant's Hearth enjoyer, or am I the only one? I feel like Serene Shores and the last area get all the praise, but this one's an absolute joy from front to back. After rescuing Yorkie, the final area of the game unlocks for you, the Primordial Thicket. The Thicket recommends ice, winged, and white Pikmin, and unlike the ultimate testing range, it kinda makes sense why these are the recommended types. The Thicket is the Pikmin series' take on a more swampy area, overgrown with mushrooms and featuring deep mud, a new type of hazard unable to be traversed by any type of Pikmin without it being frozen. Oatchi is even powerless against the deep mud, and there's a very real danger of you losing a large chunk of your squad should his tiptoe even touch the stuff. Right from the intro cutscene, you know exactly what you're getting into when you see this phallic, oddly shiny mushroom creature making its long-awaited return after over 2 decades. Oh, the puff stool. You got me so excited just to disappoint me in the same way that the second floor of the Engulf Castle disappointed me. Puffmen are no longer a thing. Instead, when the puff stool blasts your Pikmin with its spores, the affected Pikmin will be placed under the same type of trance that the groovy Longlegs inflicts. This is kinda disappointing in itself, as we don't get to see how the newer Pikmin types will look as Puffmen, but also in the fact that after being entranced, there's nothing else the puff stool can do to harm them. At least the gas from the groovy Longlegs serve the purpose of both extending the boss fight and making your Pikmin highly susceptible to being squished. The puff stool has no method of harming your Pikmin whatsoever. Without the ability to turn entranced Pikmin against the player in Oatchi, the puff stool is a mere shadow of its former self, and was once a very unique and interesting enemy, is now more or less the equivalent of a flint beetle. It's got a larger pool of health than it used to, but this enemy's gimmick was effectively gutted for Pikmin 4. I'm personally not aching for the Puffman to come back, but if you're gonna unretire the enemy to pander to some type of nostalgia, then you should at least have the decency to include what made it memorable in the first place. Considering the addition of the Toxstool, who we'll chat about later, I'd literally have rather not had the Puffstool included at all. Maybe if its behavior was more aggressive and if there were more of them scattered around the thicket, I'd be less critical of the inclusion, but there's only one of them and it's harmless, so I think Puffman enjoyers are taking a fat L on this one. Sorry, I didn't mean for that tangent on the Puffstool. There's a lot more to the thicket than just a gutted mini-boss. This area is really fun to comb through on your first day, as there's an abundance of sticky mold floors and mushrooms in your way that you have to clear out. White Pikmin see a lot of use here, as they can handle all of the poisonous enemies like the Startle Spores, Moldy Dwarf Bulborbs, and the Moldy Slooches who show up in droves here. Ice Pikmin are primarily used to freeze the deep mud in order to traverse it, as well as safely handle the new enemy, the Bog Swallow, who's actually kind of a pain to deal with without them. The winged Pikmin are at their best when they have to take out the Baldy Longlegs guarding the Autumnal Gully base, but all they realistically do outside of that is move some treasure slightly slower than the white Pikmin. For this reason, I basically replaced the winged Pikmin with purples on all subsequent playthroughs, and I found myself enjoying the bog more thoroughly. You really do notice the lack of damage you do with the recommended Pikmin loadout, so purples do wonders, not only with treasure collection, but also with handling the Startle Spores, Grub Chuckers, Matites, and the aforementioned Puffstool. The Primordial Thicket is, in my opinion, the most confusingly laid out area of Pikmin 4, as I still sometimes find myself getting turned around in it. I haven't really mentioned the Go Here mechanic that returns from Pikmin 3, but I found that in comparison to Pikmin 3, where every captain was created equal and multitasking had a larger focus, I ended up using it much less overall in Pikmin 4. Oftentimes, I'd send a captain to a spot and immediately be hit with the realization that I'd need Oatchi for something, whether a small ledge or otherwise. This isn't an issue specifically to the Thicket at all, and frankly not even an issue per se. It's just that Pikmin 4 is designed around the dog, so you're often just better off sticking together with Oatchi and only breaking off for smaller tasks when he's busy. That being said, I found myself using Go Here a fair amount in the Thicket due to its size and confusing layout. This usage was less about efficiency and multitasking, I used it more like a GPS. The Thicket's definitely more daunting than the Giant's Hearth, although I wouldn't say it's any more difficult. The mud can definitely make for some annoyance, and the Startle Spores can get out of hand if you're not careful or don't have Oatchi upgraded, so I'd say it's reasonably tough enough for a final area. Landing at the Sylvan Gate, you can basically traverse around the map clockwise or counterclockwise, but either way, you're going to have to be clearing spot caps and sticky mold the whole way. Clockwise, you'll find the entrance to the mud pit almost immediately, and further down, the Puffstool. Counterclockwise branches a couple ways, with one having a Grub Chucker and the other way a Startle Spore. The Grub Chucker way is preferable to me, since it gets you access to the Autumnal Gully base. I know I mentioned that wing Pikmin are useful in dealing with the baldy longlegs that guards this base, but as it turns out, no matter how little of an enemy is submerged in water, if the water freezes, that enemy will never be able to get out. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. Definitely an S tier Pikmin type. It's GG. I hit my electric wind god fist. It's over. He's dead. Nearby the base, there's a small tunnel that can be dug out and used to traverse the map with your captain more easily. But like I mentioned, you'll pretty much always want Oatchi under your control, especially early on in this area, so I find this tunnel not very helpful in practice. The winged Pikmin onion makes its home on a ledge behind a puzzle that can be pretty easily solved by 10 white Pikmin. If you try to get this onion without solving the puzzle first like I did though, good luck to you. It's better to just do things the way they're intended in this case. Next to this puzzle is a pond with some bouncy mushrooms, which are only fun to bounce on when you're Oatchi. Is that just me? I really don't like bouncing on it with the captain and the Pikmin. It takes a whopping 80 ice Pikmin to freeze this pond to get to the beckoning mannequin on the isolated rock. You'd think there'd be another way involving the wing Pikmin, but nope. I guess the idea is you could use the wings after using an ice blast or something, but freezing large bodies of water is really fun, so why wouldn't you just collect the treasure normally? The final base of the thicket is the Maple Bridge, which is named as such because of the insane amount of material that's required to craft this bridge. I think the most for a single structure in the game by a decent margin. This area is mostly closed off, but is instrumental in allowing you to access the largest treasure in the game, the Golden Vaulting Table. This treasure tries to carry the same aura as the Doomsday apparatus, as it requires 100 purple Pikmin to be able to lift it. You can only reach this treasure by either going through an iron fence or climbing up a climbing wall, so Oatchi's unable to help the player until they've moved it at least down to this ledge here. I'd argue that this treasure is much less egregious than the Doomsday apparatus was, because acquiring 100 purples is in general much easier to do in Pikmin 4 than it was in Pikmin 2. In addition to this, the purple Pikmin don't carry this that slow, and the Sylvan Gate base is close enough to the treasure where you won't be waiting that long either. I'm happy that this treasure was included in the way that it was, and even though people have really valid complaints about the Doomsday apparatus, I think that this isn't nearly as tall of an ask, despite all the extra work required to even get to the treasure in the first place. To get to the final Dandori battle and rescue Nell, who Louie was able to get his hands on earlier, you'll have to break open these potted mushrooms and hop across them. The final battle, as it's called, isn't really the final boss battle of the game, but it is the last of the Dandori battles you're able to take on. Like the Hot Sandy duel, Louie proves to be much smarter than Olimar ever was, but by this point in the game, you yourself are a Dandori master, so he should go down with relatively low difficulty. After beating Louie, he leaves both Nell and Moss and slurks off to commit more mischief. Upon landing in the Primordial Thicket the next day, it'll reveal that the final cave of the game is now available for you to play through. But before we can get to that absolute gauntlet, we're going to have to discuss the other two caves that make their home in the thicket. The Mud Pit has the same touchable aesthetic as the Seafloor Resort, but this time, all the water has been turned into deep mud. As I mentioned, deep mud is actually a threat to both your captain and Oatchi, so you've got to carefully watch your footing through this whole thing. The first sublevel features a Mamuda, a number of Spectralids, and a few regular Snoot Whackers who threaten to toss your Pikmin into the mud with their sweeping attack. There's 10 wild wing Pikmin here, and also 2 pink candy pop buds, so even if you decide to ditch the recommended wings upon entry, you'll still be able to retrieve the treasure no problem. There's actually a fair amount of shortcuts that wing Pikmin can utilize on these sublevels, unlike in the rest of the game, so their proficiency here in particular can be appreciated by me, a certified wing Pikmin doubter. The next sublevel is more of the same, but there's a unique layout that requires you to traverse it in a circular fashion, sort of like the thicket itself. The presence of deep mud is the biggest danger to your squad, but the bog swallows and blizzarding blowhog can also prove troublesome if you don't have any big damage dealers in your party. There's another 2 origami birds that require wing Pikmin to retrieve as well. Was this really the answer for wings? Just a few treasures to fish out of the mud? Anyway, I really like that the mud gimmick is present for a cave, even though it's a relatively short stint. The final sublevel has 2 Hermit Crawmads and also a Bug-Eyed Crawmad, but surprisingly, its arena only takes 30 Ice Pikmin to freeze, meaning that this encounter is highly cheesable. This is kind of a lame way to end the cave, but I guess I can kind of appreciate the idea on paper. There weren't any Crawmads on the previous floors, so this kind of feels a little disconnected from the rest of the level. I could picture some unique type of Bog Swallow boss here, but I digress. All in all, the Mud Pit is a rather short cave, but decently memorable because of its commitment to using the mud as a hazard and the unique and fleeting viability it gives to wing Pikmin. The Subterranean Swarm is another cave that feels a little thrown together to me. Sublevel 1 is decently interesting, featuring arachnodes, sticky mold, and some grub chuckers. I haven't mentioned it really, but the grub chuckers are much scarier looking than they are dangerous. Based on their size alone and ridiculous health pool, the player could mistake one for a mini-boss, but with enough Pikmin attacking them, they'll never actually get the opportunity to harm anybody in your squad. There are a couple more purple candy pop buds, which will definitely help if you went in with the recommended rocks and wings. The second sublevel prominently features the armored cannon beetle larva, and some boulders that completely defy the laws of physics. Your best bet is to leave the dirt wall here intact so the boulders break on impact. There's another piece of Pikmin 2 generation included here with a beetle at the top, rolling boulders down to squish you. There are some spots that you can jump to with Oatchi in order to dodge these on your climb, so this is a little more involved. I rather like this sublevel, as the platforming pieces complement the goal of defeating the enemies first and eliminating the threat of boulders from your treasure cleanup. The third sublevel is a simple fight with a horned cannon beetle, who's guarding a castaway. The gimmick of this fight is that there are sticky mold floors your Pikmin might get distracted by, so it's definitely recommended you deal with those first as you distract the beetle. Sublevel 4 has got a plethora of bugs. Finally, something that evokes the idea of a swarm. There are swooping snitch bugs, a joustmite, 3 flighty joustmites, shearwigs, matites, and a doodlebug. You may have encountered the doodlebug in the overworld of the thicket, and if you flip it all 3 times, you'll be rewarded with 6 whole ice blasts. This doodlebug's different, as after dropping 1 ice blast, it'll start dropping bomb rocks. Outside of the diversity of enemies, this is a pretty plain sublevel, so it's not really super memorable in the grand scheme of things. The final sublevel has a single Sovereign Bullblacks as its boss, and I gotta say, this is a really strange choice. There wasn't a single Bulborb in the first 4 floors, and with a name like Subterranean Swarm, you could expect something like a Baldy Longlegs or even a rematch with Groovy, but alas, this is what we got. Unlike the one in the Giant's Hearth, this one actually drops boulders from the ceiling when it attacks, so it's a little bit more of a threat. But I can't help but feel like this was a cop-out from the developers. I really think they should have had a rematch with Groovy here, I don't know. The last cave in the game is the Cavern for a King, and it is by far the longest cave, with a whopping 20 sublevels for the player to get through. The Cavern for a King borrows more from the Holy Heroes than it really does from the Dream Den, as most sublevels are home to a boss or mini-boss for you to defeat. This cave recommends blue Pikmin, white Pikmin, and purple Pikmin, and yeah, I'd say this is probably the best lineup for you here. The first sublevel features the new Toxstool mini-boss, who, unlike the Puffstool, is actually a very interesting and well thought out enemy. The Toxstool expels poison and can not only create sticky mold floors, but it can also resurrect the poison enemies that are scattered across the sublevel. The insane amount of poison here makes white Pikmin the obvious choice for dealing with the creature, but their lackluster damage can make the fight take a while, giving the Toxstool more opportunities to resurrect its allies. I'm rather impressed with the Toxstool fight, but it's really weird that it not only doesn't appear in the overworld at all, but also the fact that it's on the very first sublevel. Definitely a memorable start to the cave, and an awesome variant of the Puffstool. First-time players might notice their completion percentage hits a whopping 5% upon 100%ing the level, cluing them into the fact that yes indeed, there are 20 sublevels. Get ready. Sublevel 2 features a family of Bulborbs, the largest of which is hiding? At least I think he's hiding. It's pretty straightforward dealing with these enemies, but there's one thing the sublevel gives you access to that you may not have thought about previously. The last music treasures found here. The mechanical harp Lullabies plays Piranha Plant's Lullaby from Mario 64, and also completes the Soulful Musician series. I haven't mentioned it so far, because believe me, we'll get to it, but one of the castaways offers you a much bigger reward than just some material. Upon completing the Soulful Musician series, if you talk to Frise, he'll give you the lineup trumpet, which gives the player the ability to swarm their Pikmin, making its return from the first 2 Pikmin games. Having access to the swarm mechanic is nice and all, and truthfully, the way the Pikmin and Oatchi spaz out around the player alone makes it worth including. But there's one very big problem with how they implemented swarm here. The problem is that swarm is directly connected to the in-game camera, meaning that if you want to swarm your Pikmin, you better be ready to jerk the camera around as well. This implementation is rather baffling, and I'm sure there had to have been a better combination of buttons or something to be able to use it without having it oddly tied to this camera feature. It's also worth noting that this is the exact point in the game that you'll gain access to it, assuming you've collected everything up to this point. Yeah, you get it literally in the final cave of the game, and only if you decide to exit the cave, end the day, and come back in. I'm baffled by this choice, and frankly, I think there wasn't enough real thought put into the decision to include Swarm at all. but I'm getting too far off track, so let's head down to the next sublevel in the Cavern for a Keyng. Sublevel 3 has a trio of Snagret that are reminiscent of the Forest of Hope, and without abusing Ice Pikmin or Bomb Rocks, this is definitely a tall order for the player. As soon as Pikmin 4 starts to push the difficulty a bit, some of the less desirable traits of the engine begin to surface. With these Snagrets in particular, auto-lock is kind of a nightmare to work with. There's a careful balance the developers have created over the course of the game to make auto-lock function desirably in most situations, but as soon as things start to get a little more wonky, this balance can fall apart in fast-paced gameplay. Defeating 3 Snagrets at once should feel rewarding, but the difficulty doesn't really come from the enemy itself, but rather the lack of control the player will have over which one their army will target. I think it's the Snagret's tendency to appear and disappear randomly from the player that causes this frustration with the auto-lock mechanic. I don't know. It's a cool idea for an encounter, but really leaves a sour taste in my mouth, and I don't think it's necessarily as fun and satisfying as it should be. Sublevel 4 is a weird one, as there's an Arctic cannon beetle who will be spewing large snowballs down a winding path. This snowball can scoop up both your Pikmin and Captain alike, and bring them right back to the beginning of the level. The small orange Bulborbs dotting this path also get scooped up by this snowball, but they're not lucky enough to survive the impact with the wall by the landing base. The small platform the cannon beetle's on features some sticky mold and poisonous mushrooms, and given that there's very little area to actually maneuver here, your best bet is to try to bait the beetle to spit as your Pikmin deal with the hazard. I haven't personally had this encounter go wrong, but I imagine that it can if you're caught slacking. Sublevel 5 features 3 Emperor Bulbaxes, so it's recommended you take them on one at a time if you can. The Emperors aren't as big of a joke as they were in Pikmin 2, but they're still mostly easy though. Sublevel 6 is the first res sublevel seen anywhere in the game, which I guess checks out since the second longest cave in the game is only 6 floors. There are 2 ice candy pop buds here, but no extra Pikmin for you to help replenish your numbers. Throughout the Cavern for a Keyng, the game feels the need to have these brief encounters with Louie, showing him refusing to listen and just running away deeper into the cave. I actively don't like these, as it feels like another way the game kind of holds your hand narratively. I think it would have been more narratively effective to have Louie revealed on the final sublevel leading into the final boss fight, but again, I'll digress. Sublevel 7 features a duo of a Titan Blowhog as well as a Blizzarding Blowhog. This is the only time you'll find a Titan Blowhog in the main campaign, and it's the second time you'll find the Blizzarding Blowhog, the first of course being in the Mud Pit. Each one of these guys drops a macaroon too. How sweet. Sublevel 8 is a rematch with the Crusted Rumpup. The mud here can make the fight a little bit more difficult, but your access to purples essentially trivializes its toppling gimmick. Sublevel 9 is the rematch with the Man at Legs, except this time it's entirely surrounded by a body of water, making blues far and away the best Pikmin type to use. Since the Man at Legs has the ability to delete stray Pikmin, your best bet is to circle it with Oatchi using his Doggy Paddle ability and attack during the openings. If you brought in the recommended types of Pikmin, you won't have enough Ice Pikmin to actually freeze the arena either, making this a fight that's pretty tough to cheese. Just keep swimming, Oatchi. Everything is just fine here. Sublevel 10 features the only non-night expedition encounter with the Smoky Prog. In general, I am a fan of this new interpretation of the Smoky Prog. I think it would be really hard to recreate exactly what made the Smoky Prog so deadly and mysterious in the original Pikmin game, as most of its infamy stems from its onion patrolling behavior and ability to just evaporate Pikmin by the dozens. The Prog pursues Pikmin and the Captain, can scatter Pikmin with a roar, but also now has the capability of shooting gloom projectiles that'll instantly kill any Pikmin who touch them. These projectiles create small shockwaves on the ground, so you can jump over them with Oatchi, but again, without Oatchi, the Prog is definitely still very deadly. On sublevel 11, you'll once again get a Louie cutscene, and then dropped into what I can only describe as a Pac-Man level. The 3 Bloomcap Bloisters here are relentless, and can be insanely deadly if you aren't able to separate them from each other. The first time I made it to this sublevel, I definitely didn't know what I was doing, so a lot of Pikmin got vacuumed right up. Sublevel 12 is another rest floor, where you can replenish your purples with 2 purple candy pop buds, as well as get an absurd amount of spicy spray from the iridescent glint beetle. Sublevel 13 is the rematch with the Guildmander, who's now surrounded by poisonous mushrooms as well as some sticky mold. This kinda just forces you to deal with the hazards first before even engaging the boss, as your Pikmin will target the hazards without your permission, leading them into inevitable danger. This is sort of an underwhelming rematch, and I wish it took a page out of the Man at Legs book and featured some pools of water, or something extra to spice it up. Sublevel 14 is really weird. These armored cannon beetle larvae can apparently bend their boulders like Beckham for some reason. You can use the horned cannon beetle's larger boulder to completely body any of the larvae, which is recommended as the smaller ones are definitely a bigger threat in general.
Sublevel 15 is awesome, and features a Baldy Longlegs trampling on a small toy block city. Using blue Pikmin is nearly required here, as the area the Baldy patrols has both a puddle of water and also some mud. This is probably my favorite fight with Baldy, and the variable terrain definitely makes the fight more engaging than having it just be a flat plane. Having to use blue Pikmin also extends the duration of the fight, leading to a very memorable encounter. It is worth noting that if you utilize the ice candy pop buds earlier in the cave, or brought ice Pikmin in over one of the recommended types, the body of water here can be frozen, making this encounter cheesable like many in the game. But I won't hold that against this floor, as it's still very well designed. Sublevel 16 is basically the bully den from Pikmin 2's challenge mode, as there are 2 water wraiths here. Given the fact you have access to purples right off the rip, they go down really easily. Only one of the wraiths has the treasure, but you do need to defeat both in order to lower the numbered gate to get to the next sublevel. Now let's chat about sublevel 17, as this is probably the most polarizing of any of the sublevels featured in any cave. There's a rematch with an Empress Bulblax, but this one takes place in an almost comically small room. The developers expect you to attack her sides, and once she begins rolling, to use the geyser to shoot over to the other side of her, rinsing and repeating. Instead of birthing babies, they'll instead fall from the sky on the opposite side of the direction she's rolling, making them a hazard as you try to get to the other geyser. This is a baffling fight, and on my first playthrough, this is the first time that I ever had to use the rewind time mechanic. It's so easy to get clipped by the hitbox of the rolling Bulblax, or hit by its flail before it even initiates the attack. If you get toppled, yeah, you need to restart the fight. You won't be able to whistle your Pikmin or Oatchi in time, and you'll probably face literally the most carnage possible. Oh no! This will lead a lot of players to just using bomb rocks to deal with them safely from the ledge, or even just purposely bringing in rock Pikmin instead of one of the recommended types. This encounter is ridiculous, and even doing the fight the intended way feels slow and silly. Some level designer at Nintendo was definitely laughing to themselves as they created this death trap, without a doubt in my mind. Sublevel 18 is another fight with the Sovereign Bulblax, but the twist is that the Bulblax starts molding the arena with its jumps and various attacks. It's best to deal with this guy quickly, because as soon as the pools of water start forming in the center, you can run out of space to maneuver very quickly. If you're tired of fighting through bosses and want to get the fight over with, feel free to abuse some bomb rocks and spicy sprays, but if you lay off the gas for a bit, this fight can turn into pure chaos. The Bulblax has so many ways it can mess with your Pikmin through its roar and the terrain it creates, plus the rocks that spawn when he jumps also work away the sand. Before you know it, this whole arena can be covered in so many pools of water. This is easily the best Emperor Bulblax fight in the series in my eyes. I almost wish he had even more health so it could last a little bit longer. He also drops a dope pair of shades, but I wish he had them on his head first. Sublevel 19 is a rest floor with a bunch of fruit and some candy pop buds you can use to make sure you have a diverse enough squad for the final boss. This floor has the same skybox as the blossoming Arcadia at night, as you can see the elephant slide in the background in its full glory. Still can't use it though. There are also a ton of honey wisps here who all drop spicy spray, and if necessary, you can use the downtime to spawn whatever glow Pikmin you want. I haven't mentioned it before, but I really like that the Cavern for a King doesn't have any wild Pikmin in it, as it forces you to either trek forward with a slowly diminishing squad, or use your resources more frivolously like the glow seeds and other combat-oriented items. This cave contains 6 different types of candy pop buds, which would, in theory, allow all types of Pikmin to be in the player's squad at once, should other types of Pikmin be brought in to begin with. However, the game specifically prevents this from happening by changing the color of any candy pop buds that would produce a 7th type of Pikmin. Buds are changed to ice by default, white if ice would also be a 7th color, and purple if both those options are invalid. Glow Pikmin do not count for how many types are active at a time. It is likely this rule applies to all candy pop buds in the game, though it can only be observed in this cave. Yes, indeed. I read that verbatim directly from the Pikmin Wikipedia. Not because I'm lazy and didn't feel like coming to my own conclusions, just that this system kinda confuses me, and I literally couldn't explain it any better than the wiki could. It's kinda strange that it only lets you have up to 7 types of Pikmin, and I wish that a small exception was made for every type to be present during the final battle in some way. Maybe it's a genuine limitation to the engine, but I doubt it. Upon making it to the 20th floor, you find Louie in what looks like a mound of carpet or something. Louie gets angry that we pursued him this far and disappears into the mass of fur, only for it to turn around and reveal it's some horrifying looking dog creature. The Ancient Sirehound's presentation is awesome. You know that there's going to be some type of dog creature as alluded to in the voyage logs, but this thing was an absolute shock to me.
Pikmin has never skimped on their final boss fights, and the Ancient Sirehound is absolutely no exception. This giant oversized space dog is the last thing standing between you and curing Oatchi, so it's time to pull out all the stops. From the moment the fight starts, this insane electric guitar track starts, which is just completely alien to the Pikmin series. I know whoever was in the studio was convinced that they had to make something absolutely off the walls, and they certainly did. The Sirehound has 5 different forms that you'll have to fight through one after the other in order to defeat it. The first form kinda just lets you get your bearings with the fight as it ramps up. You have to wait for the Sirehound to bonk its head on the stalactites that fall from the ceiling, and use your Pikmin to grab onto its tail in a manner similar to both the Crusted Rum Pump and the Foolix. Purples are essential for this task, as having to throw 15 Pikmin during this window can be pretty tough. After depleting his first health bar, the pup will shake it off and transition into its icy phase. The Sirehound will blast your Pikmin with its frosty breath, and also shakes out these snowballs all around the arena, trying to mix you up. I love the detail given to these snowballs, as it would have been easy enough to copy and paste the snowballs from the Arctic cannon larva, but they went the extra mile and gave it some furry texture to let you know that these aren't just snowballs, they're furballs. The electric phase is next, and this one isn't so much dangerous as it can be tough to navigate. These spokes of electricity can trip you up and scatter your Pikmin, so some clean Oatchi movement is necessary in order to get in to topple the Sirehound. The fire phase is up next, and this one is super Bowser coded. The guitar amps up and starts riffing, and the intense feeling it creates is just absolutely palpable. This phase is probably the easiest of the elemental phases in my opinion, but it's just so memorable because of how drastically the music shifts. Each phase of the Sirehound has its own identity musically, and that's just one of the more memorable parts about the boss fight. Once you finish off the fire phase, the Sirehound really takes the gloves off. The gloom phase is one of the most ridiculously dangerous enemies in Pikmin's history. The Sirehound starts flying by flapping its ears and dashes around the arena, shooting globs of gloom to cover basically the entire floor. You're tasked with navigating this, dodging the Sirehound's scream attack that'll scatter your Pikmin, and to topple him from his flying state. The Blast Breath attack that the Sirehound unleashes is absurd, and for those of you who've watched my first ever playthrough of the game, you know I got absolutely bodied multiple times by this phase. Pikmin extinction after Pikmin extinction, I'm serious. The Sirehound puts up similar numbers to the Water Wraith and the Titan Dweevil in their prime, so I'm recommending he gets inducted into the Pikmin Enemy Hall of Fame. He's only been around a season or two, but his impact is undeniable. I'm a huge fan of this boss fight, and it's the perfect way to end a game so totally invested in the doggos. The fight definitely might last too long on repeat playthroughs, but I recommend not defeating this guy as fast as possible and just appreciating the level of detail that went into the fight when you make it there. You've probably played the game for over 30 hours at this point, so indulge yourself with the grand finale. After defeating the Sirehound, it scampers off and drops its collar. By extracting the Sirehound's DNA from the collar, Nell and Yanni are able to come up with a cure that'll work on Oatchi. Lore-wise, this is explained as the Sirehound being the originator of all space dogs, including both Oatchi and Moss, but since Moss was born with her leaf tail, she's unable to get it cured in the same way. And that wraps up with Pikmin 4's areas and caves. Generally, these areas are insanely well designed, and absolutely hold up in comparison to the areas that came before them, but there are a couple of small details that I'm not so fond of. The main thing that bugs me is once you defeat an enemy, that enemy will remain dead for the rest of your time on the planet. In previous games, enemies would respawn after a certain number of days have passed, but in Pikmin 4, this isn't the case. When you first land in an area, it feels so full of life and fun to trek through. But after you've done everything there is to do there and defeated all the enemies, they become ghost towns with basically nothing else for you. I wish that the enemies in the overworld respawned, as now there's no ability for the player to return to these areas and mindlessly fight enemies and grow their Pikmin numbers. Day to day, enemy corpses will remain on the ground where they're defeated, and if you choose not to collect them, they just kind of messily litter the ground. I wish that instead, these defeated enemies would disappear if they weren't collected during the same day. I think this is a really odd choice for Pikmin 4 to make, as it hurts the player's ability to return to an area to use the equipment that they'll only really have access to after beating the final boss. My other, less major complaint about these areas is the general lack of backtracking. You're basically able to 100% an area immediately, and don't have to mix up your exploration at all. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, as some players would want to limit the backtracking as much as possible, but in my eyes, that backtracking was previously a staple in the series to show you a new side to an area, and to flesh it out even further.
Pikmin 4 not only has the longest campaign of any Pikmin game by a long shot, there are a number of additional game modes that add some diversity and texture to what you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. When I broke down these areas, you may have noticed that I didn't touch on the night expeditions that'll be available to you once you rescue Yanni, and that's for good reason. The night expeditions conceptually function in the opposite way to a standard in-game Pikmin day. During the day, you want to branch out from your base and get as much done as you can before it ends. At night, your task is to guard the base and prevent enemies from destroying it. The danger kind of comes to you, and you'll spend a majority of your night either right next to or rushing back to your base. Compared to the exploration and diversity in the areas during the daytime, nighttime is fairly one note. I'm glad that Nintendo finally decided to give us a glimpse of the Pikmin world at night, but in general, I find that the game mode is more like a Glow Pikmin combat simulator than anything. There are no puzzles to solve, you can't collect any treasure that would normally be there in the overworld, and your only goal is to defeat every enemy, or just wait out the night. I find I'm not too big of a fan of the night expeditions overall, as it feels like a reprieve from the traditional Pikmin gameplay that I'm actually here to play the game for. I like them, but I find that having to pull yourself away from the area exploration in order to get them done makes them feel more like a chore than anything. The gameplay really boils down to one-shot the smaller enemies and glow mob the larger ones. Sure, some of the later night missions can actually get pretty tough, and the stakes can feel elevated, but that's really the only time I start to have any fun with these. The majority of them are really easy because of how insanely powerful the glow Pikmin are, and given the ability to spam resources like bomb rocks and spicy spray, everything should fold like paper to you before the night is over. I like the detail that the structures you build in the overworld can affect the paths that the enemies will take to the luminol you're defending, but to me, there's really a disconnect from the night expeditions and the rest of the game. In addition, a night mission takes a whole day, artificially inflating your day count and kind of preventing you from actually seeing if you're making good time or not. I wish that the night expeditions took place overnight instead of on following days, so you could more cleanly track your progress, but that's a pretty minor grievance to have with them, all things considered. I hope in future titles that they're able to integrate the night expeditions and daytime exploration together a little more cleanly, as it feels kind of stilted in a lot of ways. Maybe if you were able to collect treasure in the overworld at night, it could be a neat way of incentivizing the player to actually explore the caves during the day and leave the overworld treasure for the nighttime. I'm not sure, I'm just spitballing. I also wouldn't necessarily be upset if night expeditions were just a one-time trial for Pikmin 4, but without them in Pikmin 5, it begs the question, what will the glow Pikmin do in the future? Only time will tell. Overall, I find that the night expeditions can be fun if you intersperse them throughout your run, but I often just get them all out of the way at once, as stacking as many leaflings as you can in this big ol' pile at your base is hilarious and I'll always want to do it. You know what mode breaks up the game in a way that complements Pikmin's core design? The Dandori challenges. These might very well be my favorite addition to the campaign, even over the Return of the Caves, as every Dandori challenge is unique and memorable in its own way. There are a total of 12 Dandori challenges, and they're encountered in a specific sequential order, meaning that I can't attribute any individual Dandori challenge to the makeup of an area's things to do. As a big fan of the mission mode from Pikmin 3, these are right up my alley. Dandori challenges give the player a specific number and type of Pikmin and require you to collect everything in a given level within a proposed time limit. The treasures don't go toward your collection, the materials fake, and the Pikmin also don't get to come with you, meaning that nothing that happens here affects your progress above ground. I'm sure it's not just me, but I absolutely love to grind these challenges, as it's super easy to restart and get right back into the swing of things. I always make sure to platinum these on my first go around, but for players who just want to collect the leaflings, they could settle for a bronze. Later in the game at the rescue base, the Castaway Djinn will give you the option to retry these Dandori challenges for platinum, or if you just feel like improving your time and score. I like that these are incorporated into the main campaign's progression, but I do wish you had the ability to access these from the title screen outside of a specific game file. This way you could shoot for a good score independent of whatever upgrades you might have at the time. You'd also think that the Dandori challenges would utilize every type of Pikmin equally, but there's a definite focus given to certain types. Reds are in 5 out of 12 of these challenges, rocks and yellows are in 4, blues and ices are in 3, while whites, purples, and wings are in 2. While I can't attribute the Dandori challenges themselves to the makeup of any given area, I can give the Pikmin types points for their appearances and contributions in this game mode.
Reds, of course, find a lot to do here, but I find that the most interesting Dandori challenges are the ones where you're given the less utilized types of Pikmin, like the purples, whites, and wings. The time passed in caves is equal to a sixth of the time that's passed in the overworld, but the Dandori challenges don't eat into the in-game timer in the same way, meaning there's nothing stopping you from grinding it out upon first discovering it. In addition, Dandori challenges are not required to progress with the story, only to 100% the game, meaning that you could outright skip them if they don't interest you. But if you do skip them, be warned, because you're robbing yourself of some peak Pikmin content. And speaking of peak Pikmin content, once you've rescued Captain Olimar, you can speak with him by the SS Dolphin at the Rescue Corps base in order to learn the story of how he came to be in the predicament that he found himself in at the start of the story. Olimar's shipwreck tale is absolute cinema from front to back. The decision to include an entirely separate campaign for the player to sink their teeth into is an absolute flex from Nintendo, and to be frank, as a Pikmin 1 enjoyer, I find the shipwreck tale to be even more compelling gameplay-wise than the actual Pikmin 4 campaign. Let me explain. For starters, the caves and Dandori challenges have been completely removed from the campaign, so your exploration is limited to the overworld as it was in the original Pikmin game. Olimar has 15 days, not 30, to collect all 30 missing ship parts that are scattered around the first 4 areas of Pikmin 4's campaign. Cutting the time limit completely in half automatically ups the stakes from the original campaign, but considering Pikmin 4's general mechanical improvement from Pikmin 1, this limit's actually pretty fair and plenty of time for you to actually complete the tale. From the moment you touch down on the Sun-Speckled Terrace for the first time, you already know it's game time. There's no Colin or Shepard to distract you, no night expeditions to break up your progress, it's just you, your Pikmin, and the goal of getting as much done as possible within a single day. Compared to the main campaign, Olimar's Shipwreck Tale has some pretty heightened difficulty, especially during the first couple of days. As you collect more ship parts, more and more tools will be made available for you to use, but specifically on day 1, you won't have access to charging or swarming. You don't even get access to Moss until you've found her in the Blossoming Arcadia. This does a lot to spice up the general progression, but also has the added side effect of making the Sun-Speckled Terrace an incredibly tightly designed area in comparison to the base game. Generally, raw material is much harder to come by in Olimar's Shipwreck Tale, as you won't be rewarded for completing any side quests, exploring caves, or defeating Dandori challenges, so this becomes an extra resource for the player to manage more tightly day to day. You'll almost never run out of material in the base game, but in Olimar's Shipwreck Tale, if you're not picking up every piece you see, chances are you might come up a little short when you're trying to build the structure later. From the jump, the Sun-Speckled Terrace proves to be an absolute treat to play through as fast as possible. You start at the rugged scaffold base, and your resources are so scarce, and with the 20 Pikmin limit you start out with, the enemies here can actually give you some decent trouble. The additions of a Titan Blowhug, a Horned Cannon Beetle, and even minorly difficult enemies like the Mama Sheargrub really do a lot to test you in a heavier way than the base game does. There are small alterations to the map that'll change up how the progression works too, like this bag that's in place of the potted plant, or this small amount of sand that's been added in order to allow Olimar to climb the slope without moss. I've spent more time than I care to admit trying to 100% the Sun-Speckled Terrace in a single day. It's really hard, but possible, proving how tightly the area was designed. In fact, every area is possible to complete in a single day if you're efficient enough, which is just awesome given their massive size. Compared to the 15-minute days in the main campaign, a day in Olimar's Shipwreck Tale only lasts 11 minutes, leading to a generally faster pace overall. The Blossoming Arcadia has been remixed to start the player at the sun-washed plateau base and make their way down and into the Arcadia. The water in this area has been replaced with mud, allowing any Pikmin type to cross it, albeit slower than they would have normally. In addition, the Arcadia is now dotted with these fire starter pits and dried plants, making it similar to the Giant's Hearth in its progression and strategy. If it weren't for the absolutely perfect new take on the Sun-Speckled Terrace, the Blossoming Arcadia would definitely win the Most Improved award from the base game to the Tale, as I found it much more interesting and rewarding to explore the Arcadia in Olimar's Shipwreck Tale compared to the base game. The Serene Shores, by comparison, is less different than the other areas, having only increased in enemy strength and variety. I love the encounter with the Sovereign Bullblacks on top of the Sand Keep, as he'll drop the piggy bank just like he did in Pikmin 1.
With the context that Olimar's Shipwreck Tale is a retelling of the original Pikmin game, these small details and references to the first game really pump nostalgia directly into my veins. I haven't even begun to talk about the music of Olimar's Shipwreck Tale, as it's not only more lively and interesting, it also features leitmotifs that are used in the areas from Pikmin 1. The Sun-Speckled Terrace samples the Impact Site, the Blossoming Arcadia samples the Forest of Hope, and the Serene Shores samples the Distant Spring. I much prefer these tracks to the one in the base game, especially the Sun-Speckled Terrace and Blossoming Arcadia. They're just vast improvements over the regular campaign's versions. Finally, the Shipwreck Tale loops right back around to the tutorial of the game, having Olimar land in the hero's hideaway and having the Pikmin scatter in a similar fashion. After defeating the Porquilin from the tutorial, you'll see that your Pikmin are still having trouble carrying the treasure back, and are instead tasked with fighting a Guildmander in order to actually begin the day. I find that the hideaway is the area that I enjoy replaying the least in Olimar's Shipwreck Tale, but I've already expressed some of my distaste for how open the hideaway is in the first place, and this game mode doesn't really improve on that all too much. Olimar's Shipwreck Tale is just awesome. It's an incredibly thoughtful remix of the campaign that enhances the overall difficulty and tests your ability to get things done efficiently. It's essentially a standalone game that could have players trying to improve their times in the same way that they would have in Pikmin 1. But having it just be free, no string attached, non-DLC content really is a big flex from Nintendo. They did not need to include this, but they chose to, and I'm so beyond grateful for it. After collecting all 30 parts, you've officially completed the tale, and a new special bonus challenge will be awaiting for you at the Rescue Command Post. The Trial of the Sage Leaf. Again, bonus content for the sake of bonus content. These challenges range from moderately difficult to really tough, and trying to obtain platinums in this mode is also pretty hard. But let's chat about the Sage Leaf for a moment, shall we? As a character, well, we're not given too much to work with, just that he exists and seemingly has been on the planet for a very long time. He's the only leafling with white leaves, and has a pair of bushy eyebrows alluding to his age. The Sage Leaf has no desire to be rescued, and no recollection of his previous identity, but instead he just challenges the player to these 10 stories, essentially a mix of the Dandori challenges, as well as the sublevels of a cave. The first story, Bulblax's, houses a number of medium-sized Bulborbs, one for every type, and a number of smaller Bulborbs. Having such limited resources can make each enemy a challenge to kill, but I find it's not the combat that I have a tough time with, but rather actually trying to do it quickly. Specifically, the Whiptongue Bulborb always ends up giving me trouble, as you'd like to do it early to get access to the Pikmin in his room, but charging through the gate and hitting him with Oatchi's Rush can be pretty difficult. And if you don't hit the Rush, this thing has a good chance of swallowing your Pikmin right up. I remember always being surprised as soon as the time starts ticking to let me know I missed Platinum, and that is the sign that you do not have time to mess around here. The second story, Snow Problem, features both Reds and Fire Starters, so you already know I really like this one. Your task is to reach the Sage Leaf by building a clay mound up to him, so you have to gather the material from around the level. Being forced to deal with ice enemies only with red Pikmin is a neatly posed challenge, and I like that you need to collect every single piece of material on the floor in order to rebuild the mound. There's a glitch that allows you to clip through this wall by rushing an enemy's corpse to displace your captain out of bounds. This requires the extra hand, of course, and I tried it for myself, and it's actually really tough, so you might as well just play through the level normally, unless you're a top-level speedrunner. I, evidently, am not. Dig Deep is the third Sage Leaf story, and it features white, yellow, and ice Pikmin. I find this one to be the toughest in this set of challenges to Platinum. Using Oatchi to headbonk this wall to pluck the yellows is really rewarding, and trying to get everything on the far side of the pond can prove to be a challenge. On top of this, the giant melon buried on the ledge right by base is an absolute pain. I cannot tell you the amount of times I was waiting for the melon to be retrieved and then dropped from Platinum. A really well designed story with a unique combo of Pikmin. Dandori Seas, the fourth story, requires you to collect every treasure and then reach the Sage Leaf behind the numbered gate. This is another one that can be cheesed with the extra hand and a treasure, but then you miss out on watching your Pikmin carry this line of sushi, and that's an L in my book. This one actually has some good use for wing Pikmin as well, which is always a positive in a sublevel. The fifth story, the White Key, is where you'll find your first reward for attempting the Trial of the Sage Leaf in the first place. This one features wings, rocks, and white Pikmin, and asks you to collect a set of billiard balls before the numbered gate opens up, and then to transport the white onion to the ship. This sublevel generation is referred to in Pikmin 2 as a cringe layout, but Pikmin 4 drastically improves it by allowing Oatchi to jump and bounce around from path to path with ease.
This one's a lot of fun, and trying to get the onion past the mammoth snoot whacker without killing it is really satisfying. Definitely a memorable one. The 6th story is without a doubt my least favorite of the bunch. The Gimmick Gambit gives you a few mini puzzles to solve, one right after the other. These are all rather simple, and after you familiarize yourself with the solution to them, it really becomes a gimme of a level. I guess I can give it points for having you have to lead a volatile Dweevil to explode this crystal wall, but generally, I'm not big on the fan and mushroom puzzles in Pikmin 4, so this one doesn't quite do it for me. The 7th story is called One Fell Jump, and is probably the most bullshit thing the game asks you to do outside of the Empress fight in the Cavern for a King. You have 5 purples, and you have to kill 9 shear fleas and 90 bulborb larvae. Considering the auto-lock feature basically guarantees you have no control over where you're throwing, this one can feel like it boils down to luck, which it kinda does. Concentrate the large group of babies with purples, constantly whistling, and make sure Oatchi's always fighting, and you'll be okay. This story in particular really showcases how horrible auto-lock can be when there are multiple things on screen, and is often pointed to as an example against the mechanic's inclusion as a whole. And I gotta say, yeah, it is really bad here. Fine, we did it, but also that one shouldn't exist. Also, that one should just not be part of the game, I think. The 8th story is the Crowded Kitchen. You get some purples and some whites and are tasked with collecting a ton of fruit and gold nuggets. Using the Pikmin to their strengths is absolutely mandatory here, and there's a decently strict time limit of only 4 minutes. Good, fair level. The 9th story is the Turf Turmoil, and this really lets you flex your combat skills. The player is provided with rock Pikmin and can choose to turn them into purple Pikmin via the purple candy pop buds. Generally, this is where you'll see that purples are an all-around better choice in combat, as outside of the poor Quillen, which can be safely dealt with the rocks, the purples do better in just about every other matchup. I guess the Mama Shear Grubs can't crush the rock Pikmin either, but pelting them with purples is much faster. I am glad we get to see another Fulix, as we missed out on a rematch with it in the Cavern for a King, but there's nothing additional to the fight that makes it really noteworthy. Finally, the 10th story, the Purple Key, boils down to an Oatchi escort mission. Your goal is to transport the Purple Onion through rooms of obstacles and while avoiding the Water Wraith. The Purple Onion weighs a whopping 100 units, so you need either 8 purples and 20 ice Pikmin on it, or a fully upgraded Oatchi. Oatchi is definitely the preferred transporter of the Onion in my eyes, as the purples are too important for combat and are the only tool you'll have to deal with the Wraith pestering you throughout the sublevel. This one's neat in concept, but can be frustrating to grind, as you'll see the cutscene for the Purple Onion every single restart, which just kinda throws off your rhythm. The Wraith here isn't too bad, but I find the absolute worst enemy to be this Arctic Cannon Beetle at the end who guards the paper bag. He's a real piece of work. I think this one is generally less enjoyable than the White Key, but the reward is of course the Purple Onion, rounding out our onion with all 8 types, finally. And that's it. The Trial of the Sage Leaf is a challenging, yet really satisfying experience almost all the way through. Most levels are excellent and tightly designed, and even though there are a couple duds, generally I always look forward to playing through these stories again. The reward of both the white and purple onions makes this well worth playing through as soon as you rescue Olimar and complete the Shipwreck Tale, as both whites and purples should get a lot of use in the final 2 areas. The lore implications of the Sage Leaf are fascinating, and I hope to see him return in a future installment of the franchise. That is a lot of Pikmin for one person to play. If only I could divvy up the work with a second player. Yeah, it is time to talk about the co-op mode, which, let's not get it twisted, I guess I'm glad it's here in some capacity. But the Pebble Pitcher feels tacked on in the same way as the Swarm mechanic. It's simultaneously underwhelming, yet also sorta game-breaking. Bulborb has an excellent video where he beats Pikmin 4 by using no Pikmin, and it really showcases just how much can be done with the Pebble Pitcher alone. You basically shoot the enemies on screen with pebbles, a la Super Mario Galaxy, and earn other items like Bomb Rocks and Pick Carrots, which can do even more damage. These pebbles even speed up Pikmin carrying treasure. While I consider the 2-player mode of Pikmin 3 to be rather awkward to use in certain sections, it's definitely much better than what we got for Pikmin 4. I think that with Oatchi in the mix, the best thing they could have done is to just have an additional captain in your party who can sort of take turns with you in utilizing Oatchi as well as the Pikmin. This could have been Dingo, Shepherd, or heck, even Olimar post-rescue, and I feel like there was definitely a missed opportunity here. Sure, the The game is of course designed around a single player experience, and I don't have any friends who can Dandori on the same level as me anyway, but by locking the mission mode and everything interesting behind the campaign, Pikmin 4 really limits what you can do with a second player. The 2-player Dandori battle mode is also a little lackluster in my eyes. Psylocke Hawk has an excellent video detailing its shortcomings, but these can be felt even against the computers that you play against in the campaign. The Pikmin have a tendency of lying on the ground and doing nothing once they're disrupted, and also can't fight either opposing captains or Pikmin. The settings are also atrociously designed. Why tie together the charge horn, number of Pikmin, and how strong Oatchi is into one preset? Why can't these all be separately toggleable? I was really looking forward to seeing how Dandori Battle would stack up against the versus modes of both Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 3, but after messing around for a bit and consulting with other sources, I gotta say, this is unfortunately the worst versus mode of the bunch. Because of the Pikmin's behavior and your inability to mess with the opposing faction, this ends up just boiling down to having more Pikmin than the opponent. Sure, there's some strategy with the sneak bombs and high value treasure, but a lucky item pull can really turn the tide. There's not a lot of downtime in Dandori battles, unlike in Pikmin 2 where you have to pluck Pikmin periodically in order to up your army, so the games can snowball out of control with momentum. In addition, while you can select which type of Pikmin to use during a battle, the maps don't change to reflect this, meaning that certain treasures cannot be retrieved and certain obstacles can't be cleared. During a Dandori battle, treasure and enemies will also periodically respawn, the effect of which makes it so that there's usually no reason to go out of the way to even attempt to mess with your opponent's side of the field, as you'll have plenty of stuff to preoccupy you on your own side. This also has an added effect of occasionally screwing over your Pikmin who are already transporting items, and as I mentioned, if the enemy starts messing with them, they'll just lie down, and then they're just sitting ducks. With some more polish and some better mechanics, I could see the appeal of Dandori battles, but on the rare chance that I get a friend to play Pikmin with me, I'm going bingo battle all the way. There are 2 more game modes, if you can even call them that I feel like are important to mention as inclusions. Firstly, the treasure catalog lets you view collected treasure and has commentary from Schnauz, Olimar, and Louie. This provides some light reading to the player and fleshes out the world and perspectives of these characters. I personally don't spend too much time in the treasure hoard, but for lore enthusiasts and those who just want to reflect on their journey and collectibles, definitely a nice addition. Just like in Pikmin 3 Deluxe, the Piklopedia also makes its return, but this time it's even more interactive. You can choose to observe the enemies from afar, or insert yourself into the entry with access to whatever Pikmin type you want. You can use this to either practice against the enemies, or to just replay through certain fights like the Sire Hound or Sovereign Bullblacks. There's also entries for the Wild Pikmin, the Onion, and the Flarlick, and I think that including them is a really nice touch. Just like the treasure catalog, this is where you can read Dalmo, Olimar, and Louie's notes on a given creature, which I find to be substantially more interesting than the treasure-related notes. I think the new take on the Piklopedia is excellent, and definitely a highlightable returning feature. Pikmin 4 holds itself back in a lot of ways in order to create a more measured experience for the player, notably with the 3 type limit, the ability to enter and leave a cave sublevel on a whim, as well as this forgiving system with the overworld enemies, but that's not all Pikmin 4 really holds back. As I mentioned, the Castaway Frise gives you the lineup trumpet once you've collected every single musical treasure in the Soulful Musician series, and you have to go out of your way to acquire it at the very, very tail end of the game. But there are also other abilities that have been completely relegated to after the post-game. Notably, once you rescue Louie, he'll be hanging around the Rescue Corps command post waiting to give you the quest, Fit for a Feast. This quest requires you to collect different enemies for Louie to make into a dish. You gotta get 4 red Bulborbs, 2 yellow Wallyhops, a peckish Aristocrab, a fiery Bullblacks, a giant Breadbug, and finally a Sovereign Bullblacks. Because enemies don't respawn in the overworld, and they'd be brought to a Pikmin's Onion anyway, you have to find these enemies in caves, which can be rather tedious. Once you collect an ingredient, you have to end the day, bring it to Louie, and only then do you get the next ingredient in the quest. This basically requires you to burn 6 in-game days to gather the stuff for him, but the reward is almost worth it. Upon completing the quest, Louie will give you the extra hand item which allows your captain to carry exactly 1 unit of weight. This is awesome and really charming, but the problem is that it's given to you after you've beaten the game. And because all the enemies in the overworld have been wiped out, this really makes this edition all the more pointless. Another ability you can't even access until you've completed the game is Oatchi's Infinite Rush, which can only be learned after rescuing every castaway, Louie included. Infinite Rush is really fun to use, and blasting from one end of the map to the other is great. But the problem is now I'm just dashing through empty dirt fields for fun, instead of actually using the ability to speed up my gameplay. The Extra Hand, Infinite Rush, and Swarm are all given to the player either in or after the final cave of the game, which is just unfun. This is why many players hoped that there would be some type of New Game Plus, where you can play through the game again with all of your upgrades intact. This alone would justify the inclusion of these mechanics, but the reality is that you won't get any real use for these abilities unless you go absolutely out of your way to retread completed caves. It's a shame that these upgrades weren't sprinkled in throughout the game's story instead, as their current implementation is incredibly puzzling to me. Specifically, having the Extra Hand and Lineup Trumpet as starting abilities would drastically change a repeat playthrough of the game, and with the limited Pikmin numbers you have at the start of the game, they'd actually see some real use. While many players hope for some type of DLC, considering we're over a year out from release, I don't think that's likely. If anything, I could see a Pikmin 4 Deluxe releasing on the upcoming Switch 2. Considering how well Pikmin 4 is sold, you'd think it would be a no-brainer, but Nintendo can work in mysterious ways, so who really knows what the future holds. Having now spent literal months obsessing over Pikmin 4, cross-referencing footage, writing the script, playtesting, and taking notes, while also immersing myself thoroughly in the gameplay, I've really gotten to know Pikmin 4. I felt like in order to really give it a thorough judgment, I had to spend a lot of time with it, and really break down what makes it tick. I've played so much of the first 3 games that I didn't feel like it was fair to not go through Pikmin 4 at least another few times. Pikmin 4 is a monumental game, with the most content in a Pikmin title by far, so it wasn't as simple as running it a few times a day like I could with a game like Pikmin 1. Not only is there a lot of text and tutorial stuff to mash through, the loading screens also take up a substantial amount of time, leading to a generally slower feeling pace overall. This is why I really like Olimar's Shipwreck Tale and the Dandori challenges in comparison to the main campaign, with its caves and rescue core interruptions, as you'll generally be stopped less and have to deal with less loading time. I haven't mentioned the rewind time feature much, and while some may deride its inclusion, I actually find it's rather helpful for these exact reasons. Using the rewind feature to undo a bunch of Pikmin deaths does sort of cheapen the experience, and doesn't force the player to deal with the consequences of their mistake. But I find it's an invaluable tool for practicing speedy gameplay or sections of levels without having to actually wait for a loading screen. Pikmin 4 was made with so much love and attention to detail. As I approach the end of this absurdly long look at the game in its entirety, I can't help but feel like there's still so much more to talk about. I love how you find a tube of acrylic paint on the sublevels where you discover a Pikmin type. It's hilarious that Oatchi just glares at nearby enemies. The references to all the other Nintendo properties and hardware are all super nostalgic and grounded, and all I'm really trying to say is that Pikmin 4 is so jam-packed with detail and fun Easter eggs, it's hard to be disappointed with the end result. The ravenous wait for Pikmin 4 had the community stirring with the ideas of new Pikmin types, which mechanics would return, what the new areas would look like, who the protagonist would be, and all sorts of questions like that. And I feel like Pikmin 4 was always going to be a home run when it came to delivering a good product. And yeah, Nintendo knocked it out of the park. I love Pikmin 4, and despite its flaws, I feel like it's a highly respectable, wonderful addition to the Pikmin series as a whole. I feel lucky that I got to witness this game come out and how the community rallied around it at release. And I hope that people can see past the minor flaws Pikmin 4 has and appreciate everything good that it brings to the Pikmin series. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this took a long time to come out, but that's only because of how genuinely packed full of detail Pikmin 4 is. I really wanted to make sure that I sat with it before I ended up providing my extended thoughts. If you enjoyed this insanely long analysis, or maybe you just used it to sleep, please validate all the time that I spent making it by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Pikmin 4 is a beautiful, special game, and I really hope that you guys appreciate all of the time and effort that went into breaking it down. Thank you all so much again for watching. This has been awesome. Till next time.